He really thought his quiet, submissive wife was just going to pack her bags and cry. Bro, she was the whole company. Guys, pause for a second. The absolute tragedy here is that Victor actually believed his own lies. He thought he was the mastermind, but the ghost always knows where the bodies are buried. Arya didn't just take back her money. She walked into his biggest night with a mafia boss and made Victor watch his entire reality crumble on live screens. It is beautiful, it is brutal, and you need to hear this.
She was the cognitive architect of his enterprise, whom he had summarily discarded for his secretary. In response, she would initiate the systematic dismantling of that same enterprise. The process began with a message on Victor's phone. "Meet me at the penthouse." It was his spouse, Arya, who intercepted the communication. For 5 years, she had served as the covert operational core of Victor Hale's billion-dollar conglomerate. The planner, the innovator, the entire system. He was attempting to erase her from the record. Victor's singular, critical error, forgetting that the creator of the armor understands every structural flaw. If one seeks a case study in retribution, the observation begins here. Engage with this recording, state your city of origin, and witness the collapse. Concurrent to these events, a literal storm was forming outside Hale Tower. Arya Stone stood as a spectral figure in Victor's private suite, the 42nd floor, her form outlined by the storm. She possessed his mobile device, which he left behind after feigning an emergency conference 20 minutes prior. "Meet me at the penthouse, can't wait anymore, L." The message had manifested just 3 minutes ago. Arya's gaze remained on the text until the characters dissolved into meaningless shapes. L, signifying lean across, Victor's 24-year-old assistant, whose saccharine expression and inexpensive fragrance permeated the building's hallways. The most anomalous detail was the absolute stillness of Arya's hands. After 5 years of matrimony, her own physiology had selected this precise moment to exhibit a disquieting composure. She navigated upward through the message history, exposing months of his deception. "I miss your presence." The evening was ideal. "He has late work again, granting us more time." Arya had processed sufficient data. She placed the phone back in its exact original position, its display glowing like a testament on an altar. Her intent was for him to view it as she had. Following this, she departed. The elevator's descent felt interminable. 42 levels provided the precise duration needed to observe the fracturing of her last 5 years. All those evenings invested in this very structure, refining his deficient concepts. The Castellan Industries acquisition, her plan, the offshore financial structures, her architecture dominating the European sector, her contacts, her intellect, her 3 a.m. calls. She orchestrated everything from a position of invisibility. "You're too brilliant for public view," he would state, placing a kiss on her brow. "Allow me to be the public figure. You remain the intellect." And she, in her misjudgment, had placed her faith in him. Finally, the elevator doors slid open into the subterranean parking area. The sole sound was the sharp report of her heels on the concrete as she proceeded to her vehicle, a Mercedes he presented to her 2 years prior. "Only the finest for my wife," he had declared. Arya entered the car, engaged the ignition, and remained immobile. Rain battered the vehicle's roof with a brutal rhythm. Her respiration was shallow and quick. She produced her own phone and accessed her list of contacts. Her thumb paused over a single name, Marco Velez. This individual, Marco, was Victor's primary competitor. For 3 straight years, he had attempted to recruit her, having identified her as the authentic genius driving the success of Hale Enterprises. On 2 occasions, he had proposed a vice president position. She had declined both offers. Loyalty. she had stated on one occasion, at a lavish event where Victor had abandoned her to network. It holds significance for me. Marco had merely observed her with an expression of empathetic understanding. Loyalty is a valuable trait until it is violated. Arya initiated the call. He answered on the second ring. Arya Stone. What is the reason for this pleasure? Is your proposition still valid? A moment of quiet, then. Which one? The partnership, the VP position, all are available to you. That is conditional. Well, what has been altered? Arya merely observed the rain as it carved paths down the windscreen. Everything. Marco's office was a complete contrast to Victor's. While Victor preferred cold surfaces of glass and steel, Marco's space contained dark woods, aged leather, and books that showed signs of being read, not merely arranged. It possessed character. He poured her a scotch without inquiry. You appear to be in need of this. Arya accepted the glass but did not consume its contents. I require information first. Regarding what? Victor's financiers, the major one he has pursued for 6 months, the one essential for his solvency. Marco rested against his desk, observing her. He was older than Victor by about a decade, with silver at his temples and smile lines that appeared genuine. Dante Moretti. The name landed in the room with tangible force. The Dante Moretti. Arya felt compelled to confirm. Does another exist? The man was legendary. Dante Moretti's holdings were a blend of legal enterprises and others one did not question. Casinos, real estate, and security agencies with a fearsome reputation. He was exceedingly wealthy, influential, and avoided public exposure. Victor has been attempting to secure a meeting for months, Marco clarified. Moretti seeks to legitimize a portion of his assets. Victor believes securing him will make Hale Enterprises invulnerable. Has he obtained the meeting? Not even remotely. Moretti does not grant audiences to just anyone. Arya finally drank the scotch. Its warmth was a useful diversion. I must secure that meeting before Victor can. Marco's eyebrows rose. You wish to meet Dante Moretti? That is correct. For what reason? Because Victor's empire was constructed using my intellect, and I will dismantle it with my own 2 hands. To achieve this, I require an ally. Someone Victor cannot intimidate, cannot purchase, and cannot manipulate. She fixed her gaze on Marco. I require someone more formidable than my husband. The office became utterly silent. Then, his sharp smile reappeared. You have been transformed. No, Arya corrected. I have simply ceased the pretense. Arranging a meeting with Dante Moretti was surprisingly simple. It required 1 telephone call from Marco. 2 days afterward, a dinner summons came for Aurelio, the type of establishment where menus omit prices. That afternoon, she acquired a black dress, minimalist, stark, and unlike the feminine styles Victor favored. Her hair was drawn back in a severe knot, her sole adornment a pair of diamond studs. She had attired herself for conflict. Dante Moretti was present upon her arrival. The maitre d' guided her to a secluded corner where a man in his early 40s sat with a disturbing quietude that conveyed absolute control. He was dressed in a dark suit, possessed even darker eyes, and had a face that was attractive in a detached, analytical manner. He rose as she neared, an act of traditional decorum. Miss Stone, Mr. Moretti, please. She took a seat. A server materialized, poured wine, and then disappeared. Marco holds you in very high regard. Dante began. Marco desires something from me. Naturally, he would speak favorably. A faint smile appeared on Dante's lips. So, what is your objective? Arya found his directness valuable. Security, standing, and entry into circles I cannot access independently. And in return, what do you provide? Information, strategy, and the total dissolution of Hale Enterprises from its concealed liabilities to every vulnerability in its foundation. She paused. And I am aware of each one's location, as I am the one who placed them there. Dante tasted his wine, his face impossible to interpret. You desire retribution against your husband. I desire what is rightfully mine. There is a distinction. Is there? Revenge is an emotional response. This is a matter of business. This time, the smile was genuine. You are a compelling woman, Miss Stone. I am a useful one, Mr. Moretti. There is a distinction. He settled back, observing her with his sharp, strategic eyes. Victor Hale has sought a meeting with me for 6 months. He has extended some extremely generous proposals. He is in a state of desperation. A desperate man makes commitments he cannot honor. And you can? I can offer something better. I can provide you the complete schematic to deconstruct his corporation and assimilate its valuable components. I can distinguish for you what is substantive and what is illusion. Arya held his gaze without flinching. I constructed that corporation, Mr. Moretti. I know precisely the method to deconstruct it. Dante remained quiet. The only acoustics were the soft clinking of glassware and the low murmur of powerful individuals dining. What level of security are you referring to? He eventually inquired. The kind that a ring represents. His expression remained unchanged. You wish to marry me? You're cool. I want the public to believe I'm going to marry you. I require access to rooms from which I am currently barred. I need Victor to perceive me as beyond his reach. I need his entire social and professional circle to view me as allied with a man they all fear. That would be a considerable public display, or a death warrant. She allowed the implied danger to remain. It would be a strategic partnership, short-term and for our shared advantage. You are suggesting a fabricated engagement. Correct. That is bold. It is a tactic. Dante continued to observe her for another extended moment, then lifted his wineglass. Inform me about the gala. A cold purpose ignited within Arya. Which one? The yearly Hale Enterprises function, the platform where Victor displays his triumphs to every influential figure on the East Coast. It is scheduled in 6 weeks, and Victor is escorting his secretary. It was not a question, but Arya confirmed. Yes. And what outcome do you desire at this gala, Ms. Stone? The message materialized in her mind. The evening was ideal. She considered 5 years of unacknowledged labor, of shaping an empty man into a leader while she was kept as an unseen force. He had termed the shadows a shield for her protection. I want him to see me, she said, her voice a low, precise instrument. To have a true perception. Not the wife, not the phantom intellect he held captive. I want him to see what he discarded, and I want that entire assembly to see it shatter him. Dante gave a slow, measured nod. In that, our objectives are aligned. His hand reached across the polished table. Arya accepted it, his grasp secure and warm. One stipulation, he said, his fingers still enveloping hers. after the resolution. You will work for me. Not as an asset, nor as a covert instrument, but as my peer. His rationale was clinical. I engage only with those of a similar archetype. You, Miss Stone, possess a capacity for combustion you have yet to diagnose. In that moment, a fundamental component of Arya's psyche re-engaged, a mechanism so corroded by disuse its existence had been forgotten. Agreed, she stated. The subsequent 4 weeks constituted a period of accelerated, methodical deconstruction. Arya vacated the ornate enclosure she occupied with Victor, relocating not to a personal refuge, but to Dante's immediate locus of control, a sterile, high-rise structure in the financial core. The subtext, of course, was more potent if they occupied the same fortress. Victor was not insensate to the void she had created. He registered the vacancy with acuity. Her device signaled 17 times on the first day. She permitted each attempt to terminate. Upon the 18th summons, she engaged. "What is your location?" His rage was a subvocal tremor. "I am terminating our arrangement, Victor." A profound, inert silence permeated the connection, followed by a fractured query. "What?" "The dissolution is underway. You will be served the documentation by morning." "Arya, this is pathological. Whatever behavior you think you're exhibiting, I am not thinking, I am executing." Her tone was a flat, affectless line. I intercepted the messages. A second silence descended, this one of greater mass and finality. "The context is not what it appears," he finally articulated. "Do not debase my intellect." "Arya, if you would just allow me to clarify." She severed the connection. The documents were dispatched to Hale Enterprises the following day. When Victor initiated contact again, his access had been revoked. He attempted to breach Marco's office, only to be intercepted by corporate security. He dispatched floral arrangements. She had them redirected to a pediatric ward. He inundated her email servers. She routed his transmissions into a digital void. As his frantic dissolution progressed, she commenced her work. With a focus of terrifying precision, she initiated the demolition. Leveraging Marco's resources and Dante's operational immunity, Arya began the systematic nullification of the empire she had engineered. She exhumed every contract, every covenant, every non-disclosure agreement, and every strategic blueprint she had authored. The sum of her cognitive output, all archived under his name at his request, and because of a past delusion she had mistaken for trust. "You'll require legal counsel," Marco noted, observing her assault on a mountain of case files. "I have 3. You will need a superior class of litigator." Dante's voice, with the texture of grinding rock, emanated from the doorway. "She requires Jessica Chen." Arya's focus shifted abruptly. "The Jessica Chen? Is there a variant?" Jessica Chen was an icon in corporate litigation, the predator who compelled 2 Fortune 500 chairmen to their knees to repay every misappropriated dollar. She was costly, merciless, and brutally efficient. "A case of this nature is outside her purview," Arya countered. "Yours will not be." Dante entered the space. "I made an inquiry. I leveraged a marker. For what reason? I safeguard my investments." The phrasing was not proprietary. It was a statement of dispassionate, objective fact. Arya registered a peculiar internal resonance, a sensation she immediately suppressed. This was a transaction exclusively. 2 days hence, Jessica Chen materialized, a diminutive woman in her 50s with eyes like polished obsidian. For 3 sequential hours, she dissected Arya's documentation, her inquiries like surgical implements excising the core of the matter. Finally, she closed the last binder and fixed her gaze on Arya. You possess a case constructed of elemental iron. It is structurally infallible. Define infallible. Infallible to the degree that Victor Hale will lament his existence for foregoing a prenuptial contract. A clean, incisive sensation akin to success permeated Arya's consciousness. What is my next protocol? You allow me to execute my function, you persist in amassing your evidence. And for what you have orchestrated for that gala, Jessica's smile was a sharpened edge. Ensure that it is indelible. The invitation manifested 3 weeks prior, on cardstock so dense it resembled a stone tablet. You are formally invited to the annual Hale Enterprises Gala. Its arrival at Dante's penthouse was a calculated maneuver on the board. Victor had likely reviewed the attendance roster, noted the name Dante Moretti, and anticipated the opportunity for an introduction. The one critical variable he could not have foreseen was that Dante's designated associate for the event would be his own spouse. It was a flawless, tragic irony. "Are you prepared?" Dante inquired. They were in his private study. He had mandated she use the desk near the windows, asserting the illumination was superior. She no longer contested these directives. Dante was not an individual who engaged in meaningless gestures. "No," Arya replied with stark candor, "but I am proceeding regardless. Fear can be a highly effective catalyst. I am not afraid of Victor. I never suggested you were." Dante braced himself against the desk. "I stated, fear is a catalyst. The fear of regressing to your former self, of permitting his victory, of remaining an apparition in your own narrative." Arya maintained his gaze. "Is that your primary motivator?" "On occasion." He paused. "Primarily, it is the deep gratification derived from observing megalomaniacs being introduced to their own obsolescence." "That seems rather philosophical for a man in your profession." "My profession requires a certain philosophy. Absent that, one is left with only currency and aggression." A faint smile traced Arya's lips. In the preceding weeks, she had assessed Dante Moretti as a subject of contradictions, lethally capable, yet concurrently strategic, exacting, and possessing a caustic wit that consistently bypassed her defenses. "And what is the projected outcome after the gala?" she found herself asking. "You become extraordinarily wealthy, formidably powerful, and completely autonomous." "And you?" "I acquire an associate with a superior intellect who can create access to markets I have long targeted." His eyes met hers. "Unless you are experiencing a cognitive reversal." "Not a possibility." "Excellent, because I have already managed your attire." Arya paused. "You have what?" "The garment." "For the gala. It is bespoke." Observing her expression, he clarified, "Did you believe I would permit you to enter that assembly of vipers in a commercial product? You are my fiancé. Presentation is paramount. I can procure my own dress." "I am aware, but this one I wish to provide." He pushed away from the desk, approaching a garment bag suspended from his door. "Regard it as a component of the investment." Arya rose, traversed the room to him, and opened the enclosure. The gown within was the shade of a starless night, a form engineered for authority, not allure. It was optimal. "Dante, don it. If the fit is incorrect, we will incinerate it and procure another." It felt like an exoskeleton. When she emerged from the adjoining lavatory 15 minutes later, she observed a flicker in Dante's expression. It was infinitesimal, but it was present. "Well?" she queried. "You are going to systematically dismantle him," Dante stated, his voice a low frequency. It was not an inquiry. It was a prognosis. 2 weeks prior to the gala, Victor executed a final high-risk maneuver. He appeared at Dante's building, having somehow bypassed its formidable security, and began striking her apartment door at 11 p.m. Arya was in isolation. Dante had a dinner appointment elsewhere in the city. She observed Victor through the door's optic. Immaculate in a suit valued more than a vehicle, his features a meticulously composed mask of placidity. She opened the door. "Arya." He spoke her name as if it were an incantation. "Please, just permit my explanation." "There is nothing to explicate." 5 minutes, that is the entirety of my request." She should have refused, should have secured the door against him, but she required this terminal act, this final observation of him before she ignited his world. 5 minutes, she conceded. He crossed the threshold, his gaze assessing the apartment's severe design, the vista of urban lights, all the clear data points of a reality that did not involve him. "So, this is your new habitat?" "It is." "With him?" "Correct." A muscle in Victor's jaw triggered. "You are committing a catastrophic error." "The sole error I committed was investing trust in you." "Lena," that was a lapse in judgment. It was meaningless. Arya's laugh was startlingly authentic and visceral. A lapse that persisted for 6 months. "I was going to terminate it. You were going to do nothing, Victor. You were going to maintain her and me and the fiction that you were the architect of Hale Enterprises, when we both know the reality of the situation. I always acknowledged you for your work. Contributions." The word was an accelerant, and the final trace of warmth in Arya's voice extinguished, leaving only a clinical coldness. "I fabricated that corporation from its foundation. Every critical acquisition, every strategic realignment, every single maneuver that prevented your collapse. That was all my labor, and you were entirely content for me to operate from the shadows as long as it serviced your ego. I was shielding you. The board, the investors, they would have dismembered you." "You mean they would have identified you as a complete imposter without me?" The charge remained between them, dense and sharp as a guillotine. The color drained from Victor's face, supplanted by a wave of pure rage. "You unappreciative! I created you! I gave you all of this! You gave me nothing I had not earned tenfold, and now I am repossessing it. You would not have the audacity." He advanced toward her, and in that instant, Arya finally observed the true predator beneath his facade. "I will orchestrate your complete ruin. Do you believe Dante Moretti intimidates me? I will disseminate every transaction, every clandestine agreement, every ethically dubious decision you ever executed that I executed at your directive. With your authorization, under your name." A slight smile formed on Arya's lips. "You see, that is the liability in allowing a ghost to construct your legacy, Victor. The ghost knows precisely where every anomaly is located. I will litigate. I will ensnare you in legal proceedings for a decade. You will be defeated, and you are aware of this." The door opened. Dante entered, his perception processing the scene instantaneously. Victor, violating her personal space. Arya, cornered, but not compromised. Mr. Hale, Dante's tone was unnervingly placid. I have no record of issuing you an invitation. Victor pivoted. For a microsecond, Arya detected raw, undiluted terror in his eyes. He suppressed the reaction instantly, a display of somatic inflation. This is a private matter. Your impending former wife, Arya's correction was clinical, and her decision is unequivocal. She has no desire for contact, Dante stated. Therefore, I will request, once, that you depart. This is unresolved, Victor fixated on Arya. Yes, her tone was subdued. It is. Victor exited abruptly. Dante secured the door. Are you injured? Yes. Arya then observed her own tremors. It was not fear, but contained homicidal rage. I am unharmed. No, you are not. Sit, she complied. Dante decanted a measure of scotch. He is in a state of terror, Dante observed, presenting the glass. A precise analysis, Dante's voice was a low frequency. A frightened subject is a dangerously unpredictable variable, as is a female motivated by retributive justice. A knowing expression formed on his lips. A valid point. A dense, weighted silence permeated the room. Beyond the window, city lights diffused into a matrix of a million lives, none cognizant of the two subjects at a psychological precipice. 2 weeks, Arya vocalized. It was Dante's absolute guarantee. 14 days. Her voice was thin. I can manage this. I have no doubt of your capacity, he affirmed, pausing. But you are not required to endure this ordeal in isolation. Her focus finally landed on him, assessing the stranger who had enveloped her in his name and influence. He demanded nothing but to be present during the deconstruction. Why? She exhaled. What is your psychological investment? He feigned incomprehension. In what? This. My assistance. You could have provided the evidence and allowed me to prosecute my own campaign against Victor. Why position yourself in the direct path of aggression? Dante observed the cityscape for a prolonged period. Because I comprehend the sensation of investing your psyche into a creation, only to see another affix their name to it. I understand being misjudged due to lineage, history, or misplaced trust. His dark, incisive eyes met hers again, and I recognized the precise moment a subject reaches their breaking point. A nonverbal compact formed between them, a bond forged in stimuli deeper than contracts. Thank you, was all Arya could articulate. Do not express gratitude yet, he said softly. Reserve it for the victory. The night before the operation, sleep was an unattainable state. Arya stood at his apartment window, her fortified position, she conceded, observing the city, a life from which she felt dissociated. In the morning, her reality would systematically unravel. She would enter that hall with Dante Moretti and witness Victor's life implode. She would cease to be a non-entity. Her phone vibrated. A text from Jessica Chen. The asset is deployed. I will see you tomorrow. A second stimulus. Marco. The board's cohesion is fracturing. I am bringing coffee. A third. Dante. The auditory void is unsettling for me as well. Join me on the roof. Arya took a jacket. The elevator's ascent, feeling like a slow approach to a terminal event. He was there, a silhouette against the city, attire loosened. He appeared younger, his defenses momentarily lowered. Are you experiencing anxiety? He asked, the words carried on the wind. Fear. That is a positive indicator. Why? It signifies you perceive a potential for loss. It means this is not merely about retaliation. Arya moved to the ledge beside him. Then what is the objective? She thought she heard him murmur. Justice, autonomy, the opportunity to construct something that is yours alone. He met her gaze. And yes, a minor component of revenge, but that is not the primary goal. She produced a weak laugh. You are inefficient at providing moral support. I am not here to provide it. I am here to reinforce your primary motivation. He turned to face her fully. Victor Hale expropriated 5 years of your life, your concepts, your trust. Tomorrow you reclaim it, with compounded interest. That is not revenge. It is an equation. Justice is a form of mathematics, Arya whispered, recalling their initial meeting. Precisely. They stood in the cold, the city below them like a fractured reflection. Arya could visualize the scenario, the gown, the ballroom, the expression on Victor's face upon recognizing the true magnitude of his miscalculation. What if the operation fails? She asked, her voice faint. It will not fail, but if... Arya! Dante's voice was unyielding. It will succeed. You have controlled for all variables. The evidence is irrefutable. The legal team is prepared. The board is already destabilized by Marco's disinformation. Jessica has 3 key investors prepared to withdraw on our signal. He allowed the data points to hang in the air. You have constructed the optimal enclosure. The only remaining action is to trigger it. And if he retaliates, let him, Dante said. The more he resists, the more pathetic his presentation. His expression softened, a rare aperture in his emotional armor. You are not the woman he discarded, Arya. You are not the woman who entered my office 6 weeks ago. You have remolded yourself into something he cannot break, control, or possess. And tomorrow you will demonstrate the precise meaning of that. A quiet certainty solidified within her. I am prepared, she said. I know. They remained on that rooftop as first light appeared, discussing the plan, the future, and the empire he intended for them to build from the collapse. And for the first time in 5 years of torment, Arya felt integrated. Not a wife, not a phantom, simply Arya, forged in betrayal, honed like a weapon, and ready to reclaim her identity. The gala was 12 hours away. The anticipation was a somatic ache. Dawn arrived like a sudden impact. Arya was awake at 6, hyper-aroused with nervous energy. She attempted to eat. The toast was flavorless. Coffee was her only stimulant. A 3rd cup seemed necessary. By 8, the apartment was a tactical operations center. Jessica Chen arrived, her 2 briefcases and suit projecting the aura of a corporate terminator. A nervous paralegal, David, followed, converting the table into a command post. We activate at 7 o'clock tonight, Jessica stated, her documents arranged like strategic charts. Victor begins his address at 7:30. We detonate the information at 7:45. Why the 15-minute delay? Arya inquired. Because we require him to be at peak arrogance, confident, self-possessed. Mid-speech is the optimal moment. Jessica's smile was a thin, cold line. The greater the elevation, the more severe the fall. Marco arrived at 9, with pastries no one consumed and an excitement alien to Arya. He resembled a child on Christmas. I have waited 3 years to witness Victor Hale's enterprise combust, he said, pouring coffee. This will be spectacular. It will be a clinical dissection, Jessica corrected, her focus on her screen. A subtle distinction. Dante emerged from his suite at 9:30, impeccably dressed but for his jacket. His eyes located Arya, still in sleepwear, her hands trembling around a mug. He guided her gently toward her bedroom. It's time, he said, his voice low. Take the necessary duration. The operation will not commence without you. The bathroom was a sterile field of marble. Arya let the hot water run over her, attempting to impose order on the chaos of her thoughts. Tonight, she would confront Victor and Lena. She would stand before 400 individuals and expose 5 years of deception. Her hands were still unstable when she emerged. The gown hung on the door, a swath of midnight blue, perfect and waiting. Arya observed it for a long, silent interval before she could initiate the action of dressing. The silk was a cool stimulus against her skin, conforming to her body like a second integument, like armor. An hour was allocated to the ritual of cosmetic preparation. She selected a subdued presentation, soft hair, a neutral facial palette, except for the lips, a deep, defiant crimson. The subject in the mirror was older than the one from 6 weeks prior, her expression hardened, her eyes showing a new, unbreakable sense of self. When she re-entered the main room, Dante was present. He looked over, and for a moment he was motionless. "What?" she asked, her voice constricted. "Nothing." "You appear..." He paused, searching for the correct descriptor, and found it. "Prepared." From her station, Jessica glanced over. "Correct. We require photographic documentation." "Photos?" "For the initial volley," Jessica countered. "Dante Moretti and his new, unidentified fiancé. We released them 30 minutes before our arrival. Let the disinformation channels activate." She signaled to David, who produced a camera. "Just a few. Assume a relaxed posture." A relaxed state felt entirely inaccessible. Arya was a conduit of raw neurological signals. Dante's hand on her waist was a warm anchor, a tether to the constructed reality of their performance. He leaned closer, his scent like an atmospheric disturbance. "Breathe," he murmured, "for her alone. This is not your termination. The conflict is already decided." "Then why do I have the somatic response of nausea?" "Because you are not an inorganic object," he whispered back. The camera's shutter actuated approximately 50 times. Each burst of light a component in a meticulously engineered psychological event. A clinical review of the images followed. Jessica selected 3, dispatching them to a numbered anonymous contact. "The sequence is initiated," she confirmed. "They deploy at 6:30. Your identity will precede you into that environment." A physiological stress response manifested in Arya. "All of them?" "Every individual classified as either a tool or a threat. The room contains subjects conditioned to screen-based stimuli. They will process the visual data, associate you with Dante, and construct the intended narrative." Jessica's expression was that of a predator assessing a successful outcome. "Victor will perceive your approach long before visual contact." "Affirmative." A voice of pure function emerged from Arya, surprising even its originator. The subsequent hours underwent temporal distortion, each minute extending into a prolonged period of anticipation. Arya attempted to process text, but the words became a disorganized sensory input. The television offered no solace, its audio output an irritating environmental intrusion. At his desk, Dante was a controlled system of potential energy, his Italian a low-frequency hum vibrating with tactical planning and latent force. At 4, Marco departed. At 5, Jessica and David dismantled their portable operations center. "I will see you in the operational theater," Jessica stated. "And remember, you are a non-entity until I give the signal. Your sole function is to project an aura of invulnerability and allow them to formulate their own conclusions." "What if he isolates me beforehand?" In that event, Dante fulfills the terms of his contract. She replied with a sharp, clinical smile. Or its equivalent. You comprehend. Following their departure, the expansive apartment was filled with a complete and oppressive auditory void. Positioned at the window, Arya became a static silhouette, observing the depletion of natural light as the city's electrical grid activated. You require caloric intake. Dante's voice penetrated the silence. I am unable. Hydration, then. To lose consciousness mid-operation would be suboptimal. She pivoted to face him. He was extending a glass. She accepted it, the cold liquid a shock to her system as she confronted the reality of her own dehydration. Acknowledged, she exhaled, for the water. For the entire operational design. His gaze performed a clinical assessment, maintaining contact for a sustained interval. You will achieve your objective tonight, Arya. You repeat this assertion. Because it is a factual certainty. He consulted his timepiece. The transport arrives in 30 minutes. Are you prepared? No, her entire psyche registered, but she verbalized the required response. Yes. At 6:30, precisely as the event's architect had scheduled, the images permeated the network. Arya's mobile device was inundated with the digital cascade, a surge of messages and missed call alerts, so overwhelming she terminated its function. Let them speculate, Dante had instructed. The fallout will be managed tomorrow. Their transport, a discreet black Mercedes, lacking the overtness of a limousine, arrived at 6:45, its operator a stoic component. Arya entered the vehicle, the silk of her gown, a cool sensory input against her skin. Dante positioned himself beside her. The Grandview Hotel was a 20-minute transit. She observed the cityscape deforming into a blur of light. Familiar structures from a world that remained unchanged, while her own had been fundamentally restructured. Her cognitions drifted to her last attendance at this function. 2 years prior, Victor had introduced her to 3 individuals, then left her as a peripheral ornament while he commanded the social nucleus. What is the subject of your thoughts? Dante's voice was a low-frequency vibration. That I should have initiated the complete deconstruction of his life 2 years ago. You lacked the necessary assets for that conflict 2 years ago. What is the basis for that assessment? Because your current armament is barely adequate. Observing her expression, he recalibrated. That is not a pejorative analysis. What you are about to execute, re-entering Victor's power base to publicly dismantle it, requires a highly specific form of psychic leverage, the kind developed only in the aftermath of total collapse. I am not damaged. No, but you were. And you have since reconstructed yourself into a variable Victor cannot possibly calculate. That is our tactical advantage. Forgive me. The Grandview Hotel materialized before them, 50 stories of glass and steel, a sharp vertical against the night sky. A queue of vehicles progressed toward valets and security personnel consulting their lists. Arya observed females in designer attire and males in $1,000 suits moving toward the entrance. 2 years ago, she had experienced severe imposter syndrome among them. Tonight, her internal state was one of perceived ownership of the entire structure. Their vehicle advanced to the front. The valet opened Dante's door. He exited, adjusted his jacket, and extended a hand to Arya. She accepted it. The environment detonated in a blinding concentration of photo flashes before she had fully egressed. Arya's musculature contracted involuntarily. The paparazzi were an uncontrolled variable, but Dante's grip on her hand tightened. a fixed point in the sensory overload. Smile, he sub-vocalized. Provide them with a narrative to deconstruct. And she complied. She smiled as if the evening was her design, as if this chaotic reception was a calculated element of her arrival, and not as if she were a barely contained device of fear and retribution. They proceeded through a corridor of high-intensity light. The lobby contained a secondary level of chaotic stimuli, additional cameras, more observers, every subject in the voluminous space reorienting toward them. The vocalizations began immediately. Is that Dante Moretti? Who is his companion? I have seen the images. That is his fiancé. Moretti has a fiancé? Her features are familiar. Is her status significant? Dante moved forward, a hand on the small of Arya's back, displacing the massive bodies like an individual who never questioned his right to dominate any occupied space. Security waved them through the checkpoint without protocol. It was understood. Dante Moretti is not subject to queuing. The ballroom was on the 3rd floor, a vast enclosure with cathedral-like ceilings and chandeliers capable of crushing a vehicle. It was already a churning matrix of faces Arya recognized from financial publications and social reports. Established wealth, new money, and the kind of high-risk capital not discussed in sanctioned social settings. This was Victor's ecosystem. Except tonight, he was no longer the sole apex predator. There, Dante murmured, inclining his head across the space. Arya's gaze located Victor near the bar, managing his usual coterie of subordinates. He was smiling at a remark, champagne flute in hand, entirely at ease. He was unaware of the structural failure occurring beneath him. Where is Lena? Arya inquired. 3 o'clock in blue. Arya scanned the assembly. Lena Cross stood near the silent auction, her attire attempting a grace it did not possess. She was young, painfully so. She projected the wide-eyed optimism of one who still perceived the world as a platform for ambition, not a pit of vipers. For a single, fleeting moment, a trace of empathy for the girl manifested in Arya, only to be immediately suppressed. Mr. Moretti, a man in his 60s, approached, his hand extended. I must admit, your attendance is an unexpected variable. Richard, Dante clasped his hand. A spontaneous decision. May I introduce my fiancée, Arya Stone? A measurable alteration occurred in Richard's posture. Stone. You are referring to... As in the Arya Stone, Dante interjected, his delivery seamless. I find the name functions as a standalone signifier. It was a precise, tactical maneuver, reframing her not as Victor's discarded associate, but as the architect of her own identity. The communication was received. A distinct pleasure, he murmured, his lips making minimal contact with her knuckles. Your strategic intellect is the subject of legend. Is that a current data point? Arya's voice was a flat, cool baseline. Oh, unequivocally. The Castellano merger was a masterclass in corporate conflict. You personally salvaged that entity from terminal decline. A nexus of ice formed in Arya's abdomen. Thank you. Richard withdrew. His void was immediately occupied by 2 more individuals. A husband and wife, owners of a luxury hotel conglomerate, followed by a venture capitalist, and finally a hedge fund manager. With each, Dante's introduction protocol was unaltered. My fiancé, Arya Stone. And with each, the response mirrored the last. A jolt of surprise, a flare of interest, then the slow cognitive assimilation of the truth that she was not a mere accessory. Her professional achievements were being retrieved from their memories. The mechanisms of recognition were audibly engaged. Across the grand ballroom, Victor's performance of normalcy continued, perfectly isolated from the changing reality. He still had not registered her presence. Marco materialized at Arya's side, a flute of champagne already provided. The ambient tension is approaching an intolerable level. When does he finally acquire her? Patience, Dante murmured. Patience is inefficient. Patience is a weapon. A server passed with a tray of champagne. Arya procured one not for consumption, but to counteract the tremor in her hands. More subjects converged on them, more introductions, more flashes of cognitive retrieval, illuminating faces as they processed the name. Arya observed the information propagating through the room like an electrical charge. A head would incline for a whispered exchange. A phone would be removed from a pocket for a rapid, discreet search. By 7:15, 50% of the room knew Dante Moretti had arrived with Victor Hale's estranged wife. At 7:20, an unfamiliar female approached with the focused intent of a predator. Arya Stone, she breathed, her vocal tone a thick application of synthetic sincerity. I received intelligence indicating you had returned. What a significant event. Is it? Arya responded. Well, following the disorganized affair with Victor, the collective assumption was that you had receded into anonymity. The woman's smile sharpened to a cutting instrument. But to re-emerge with Dante Moretti, now that is an audacious maneuver. Dante's hand made contact with the small of Arya's back. Audacious is one possible descriptor. The woman's laugh was thin and brittle, like fracturing ice. Victor must be undergoing a significant psychological fragmentation. Is that your assessment? Arya's face was a perfect, tranquil mask. Oh, without question, losing you was one thing, but to lose you to... Her gaze shifted to Dante. Well, this is a considerable narrative deviation. Pardon our intrusion, Dante intervened, his courtesy a tactical instrument. An associate requires my attention. He guided Arya clear before a response could be formed. A pure opportunist, he murmured. Her analysis, however, is correct. Victor approaches a stress threshold. Excellent. That is the intended result. At 7:25, a controlled blackout descended on the hall. An announcement guided attendees to their tables. A mass relocation commenced. Arya and Dante were situated at Table 3, an optimal observation post for the planned event. Marco joined them, along with 2 financiers and a tech CEO of prior acquaintance. Ms. Stone, the executive acknowledged as she took her seat. An unexpected pleasure, the CEO observed. It was a spontaneous decision, Arya stated, echoing Dante's fabricated cover. And you have a formidable escort. The CEO's gaze shifted to Dante. My felicitations on your engagement. Thank you, Dante replied, his tone devoid of emotion. Arya could almost visualize the CEO's cognitive processing, calculating the strategic timeline of this new pairing. At 7:28, Victor ascended the stage, presenting a facade of meticulously engineered confidence. For Arya, the ambient oxygen seemed to deplete. His appearance was his primary tool, the tailored suit, the flawless hair, the conqueror's expression as he approached the lectern. Good evening, he began, his voice projecting pure narcissism, the sound of a man assured of his victory. This was a benchmark year for Hale Enterprises, Victor declared. Our European market penetration exceeded forecasts by 40%. The Castellan Industries Alliance created unprecedented opportunities. Our future ambitions are even greater. Arya's hands clenched. He was narrating her intellectual labor as his personal achievement. "I attribute this success to my outstanding team," Victor stated, indicating his executive circle. Their relentless dedication made this possible. From the front row, Lena watched him, completely captivated by the constructed narrative. A primal impulse to launch her glass across the room surged through Arya. Under the table, Dante's hand enclosed hers. "Breathe." She complied with the directive. "Inhale, exhale." Victor continued his fabricated epic of corporate triumph. The audience absorbed it, their applause and affirmative gestures validating the myth he had constructed. At 7:43, Jessica Chen appeared at Arya's side. 2 minutes, are you prepared?" Arya delivered a single, sharp nod. Jessica receded into the shadows, assuming a position near the stage with her phone activated. On stage, Victor prepared for his climactic, grandiose statement. "And as we turn to the future, it is my profound honor to announce—" At that moment, every screen in the auditorium ignited. The large displays flanking the stage, every monitor, and the innumerable illuminated phones of the guests synchronized to one catastrophic message. The title read like a legal judgment. "The True Architect, a Claim of Intellectual Property Against Hale Enterprises." A low murmur began, escalating into a disorganized roar. Victor froze, the words expiring in his throat as his gaze fixed on the screens. His mask of self-assurance dissolved into stark bewilderment, the blood draining from his face in 3 seconds. "What is this?" he faltered. A second voice, composed and incisive, penetrated the growing chaos. "Good evening, I am Jessica Chen, counsel for Ms. Arya Stone in her legal action against Hale Enterprises and Victor Hale." The ballroom erupted in a frenzy of agitated whispers. Victor's eyes scanned the room, a desperate search that ended on her. The instant of comprehension was a palpable force, the stark realization of her flawlessly executed campaign. "Tonight," Jessica's voice continued, "we will demonstrate that the signature achievements of Hale Enterprises originated not with Mr. Hale, but with Miss Stone during their marriage. This was labor for which she was never compensated, credited, or acknowledged." The screens transitioned, showing contracts signed by Arya ceding her own intellectual assets. Financial records materialized, revealing payments to shell corporations, entities Victor established to covertly transfer funds to Arya. "That is false!" Victor reached for the microphone. "This is a fabrication." "The Castellon merger," Jessica's voice overrode his objections. "Proposed by Ms. Stone in March of 2021. We possess documents proving she led all critical negotiations. She structured the terms. She managed the legal complexities. Mr. Hale merely signed the final document." The screens now displayed a stream of undeniable evidence, Arya's handwritten notes, original strategy documents, and detailed risk analyses. The hushed murmurs intensified into audible, shocked discourse. A multitude of phones rose throughout the room, recording the damning evidence being displayed. "The European expansion," Jessica continued her systematic deconstruction, "was also conceived by Ms. Stone. We have the market analysis, the partnership agreements, the initial business plan, all authored by her, dated well before Mr. Hale claimed it." Victor's complexion shifted from pallid to a blotchy, furious red. "This is an invasion of my privacy. Someone deactivate those screens." No individual moved to assist him. The offshore tax structure, the tech sector entry, the debt reorganization that saved this company in 2022. Jessica's voice was a relentless force. All Ms. Stone's intellectual labor, all unacknowledged, all misappropriated. Arya sat motionless as if enthroned, her drink untouched, observing the immolation of Victor's world. Arya! He finally located her, his finger trembling as he pointed. You engineered this. You believe you can simply... I believe I can reclaim what is mine, Arya stated, rising from her seat. Her voice cut through the astonished silence. I believe your era of building an empire on my intellect has concluded, and I believe it is time this room knew who truly built Hale Enterprises. A profound quiet descended. Victor could only stare at her, utterly broken. You're delusional. You're... Lena, tell them it is all false. Every head turned toward Lena, whose face was now ashen. Lena started, her voice a faint tremor. Tell them, Victor shrieked. I have no knowledge of this, Lena whispered, the words barely carrying. Of course you do not, Arya retorted. You are 24. You have been employed here for 8 months. You cannot comprehend what was required to build this company because you were not present. She addressed the entire room. But I was, for every sleepless night, every market downturn, every impossible project. I was the one performing the labor while Victor accepted the accolades. That is an absolute falsehood, Victor sputtered, but the words lacked conviction. Then explain the contracts. Jessica's voice resonated. Explain the emails. Explain why Miss E. Stone's name underpins every significant strategy of the past 5 years. Victor's jaw hung open. He was speechless. Marco appeared ecstatic, as if he had been crowned. Dante, relaxed, observed the elegant demolition. Ms. Stone is filing for divorce, Jessica announced, and suing for the recovery of her intellectual property. We estimate the value of her stolen contributions to Hale Enterprises at approximately $200 million. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. 200 million? That is absurd, Victor finally managed. You will receive nothing. We have verification for every dollar, Jessica stated, including the shell entities you used for payments, and the ND, as you coerced from her, in the agreements you forced her to sign, relinquishing her work without compensation. The screens behind them shifted to a flood of financial data. Phantom companies, concealed accounts, the very framework of his deceit. Victor, a man named Richard, called out from a forward table. Is there any truth to this? Victor hesitated. She is distorting events. Did you or did you not? Richard insisted, his tone sharp. Compel your wife to sign away the rights to her own intellectual output? Victor's silence served as his confession. Respond to the query, another investor demanded. It was, he stammered. We are married. It is a marital asset, all of it. An asset you concealed from your own board, Jessica interjected. An asset you presented as your singular genius in all official filings. An asset you leveraged to obtain financing under fraudulent conditions. More exclamations of shock, more irate whispers. Arya observed the contagion of doubt spreading, the slow, grim understanding dawning in their eyes as they processed the deception. These were individuals of capital and control. Victor had just destroyed both. I insist on a complete audit, one man shouted. I support that motion, yelled another. This is a persecution, Victor pleaded, his voice fragile with panic. The revenge of a resentful woman. This is a woman's documentation, Jessica corrected. Documentation we will be filing in court on Monday morning. We are also submitting this documentation to the SEC, evidence that Mr. Hale has participated in systemic fraud. The word landed with the force of a detonated charge. Fraud. Victor's expression collapsed. For a brief moment, Arya saw the small, insecure man from their past before his face contorted into a mask of pure animosity. You will be punished for this, he hissed, his gaze locked onto her. I will destroy you. Is that a threat, Mr. Hale? Dante stood, his composure a calculated contrast. Because I am certain this entire assembly would find you menacing your estranged wife to be quite revealing. Only then did Victor seem to fully process Dante's presence. His eyes widened. You, he whispered, you are with him. This is because, model, this is a reclamation of my assets. Arya's statement cut through his own. Dante offers parody, not the shame of concealment. A deep silence enveloped the assembly. An audience of 400 observed the methodical dismantling of a union. My love was real, Victor stated, his composure fracturing. I provided for you completely. You provided nothing beyond what my own efforts secured prior to my replacement. Arya's tone was devoid of affect. Do not lecture me on love, Victor. The concept is foreign to you. The subject appeared stunned, his verbal faculties failing him. The humiliation was then broadcast globally via personal devices. This is a violation, he finally whispered, his authority diminished. An agreement was in place, a vow. Past tense, Arya affirmed with surgical precision. Its validity ceased upon your contact with Lena. The other woman, Lena, emitted a choked sob as her psychological defenses collapsed. Arya registered a familiar pity for the subordinate, even while observing the primary target's downfall. Ms. Cross, Jessica interjected with clinical sharpness. Records identify you as Mr. Hale's assistant. Confirm a personal involvement with him for the last 7 months. Lena's complexion reddened. That information is personal. Privacy is not a defense against fraud in a dissolution of marriage, Jessica declared, her tone frigid. I repeat the question. Were you involved with Mr. Hale during his marriage? Do not respond, Victor commanded. Lena maintained silence. Yes. Lena's admission was almost inaudible. We were and are. Her expression pleaded for his intervention. Validate our connection for them. Lena, be silent, Victor retorted, his superficial charm yielding to raw aggression. Arya observed the extinguishing of hope in the younger woman as the subject's motivation became clear, an attraction not to her, but to her youth and submissiveness. You made a promise, Lena's voice faltered. You professed love. You stated that post-divorce, there is no value remaining, Victor shrieked, his pitch rising. Observe her actions. She is executing a scorched earth strategy. The spectator's response evolved from surprise to captivated interest. A colleague, Richard, intervened. Victor, desist. The board must assemble. The board? Victor's laugh was sharp and uncontrolled. The board is irrelevant. I manipulate half of you. Or rather, your wife manipulates them. His former wife, it seems, a sharp voice commented. A woman in her 50s, displaying a formidable demeanor, advanced. Arya offered a quiet correction. Not yet. The name Catherine resonated as she focused on Arya. Ms. Stone, she began, her words deliberate. Is the Chen testimony accurate? The strategies Mr. Hale claimed? Did they originate with you? Arya rose, her composure solidifying. Correct. She then enumerated her unacknowledged work, her voice steady. I possess the emails, the documentation, the meeting recordings. All evidence was archived. Catherine nodded slowly, a gesture of judicial finality. Substantiation of this claim presents a catastrophic liability. Victor became agitated. There is no liability. This is a complex marital dissolution. It is within legal bounds. Jessica's voice sliced through his denial. Fraud is inherently illegal, she stated, and fabricating intellectual property for capital investment is a textbook example. The SEC will take significant interest. A palpable anxiety spread among investors. 3 directors rose, then 5, a unified gesture of condemnation. An emergency meeting is convened, Richard declared, tonight. To mitigate further damage, a cheerful voice interjected. Oh, the damage is already widespread, Marco said, displaying his device. The event is trending across 3 separate platforms. The display illuminated the terms of his public disgrace. #Hale Enterprises Scandal, #fraud at the top, and Marco's addition, my preferred tag, #Arya Stone's Revenge. Victor's hostile gaze fixed on Marco. This is your work, both of you. Marco remained dispassionate. I am simply appreciating a complex sequence of events. A sly smile formed on his lips. Although I may have alerted the media to expect a volatile evening, I trust you have no objection. Victor's voice fractured. The media is present? Marco's smile broadened. Unnecessary. The online activity signaled a crisis. The downfall of a powerful figure is a compelling narrative. Victor's focus shifted erratically, finally settling on Dante. You orchestrated this to ruin me, to seize my corporation. Dante's tone remained modulated, a point of stability. Your company holds no interest for me. It is financially insolvent. I pursue human capital. His attention shifted to Arya. And I have located a prime asset. Victor's speech grew disorganized. She is manipulating you. This is nothing but a pathological vendetta against me. Incorrect, Dante stated. She is executing a logical strategy to recover her assets. My role is merely supportive. The distinction is critical. Victor's protest was cut short by a new arrival. Mr. Hale? A man in conservative attire appeared, his presence immediately altering the room's atmosphere. Agent Morrison, with the Securities and Exchange Commission, I require you to accompany me. An immediate and total silence descended on the hall. Pardon? Victor was immobile. At this moment? For what reason? The agent's voice was flat, without emotion. This is not a formal arrest. However, Miss Chen's testimony necessitates immediate clarification. Morrison's expression was neutral. Cooperation can be voluntary, or it can be compelled. Victor scanned the faces of Lena, the directors, and finally Arya, his appearance pallid and diaphoretic. His gaze communicated a final, empty threat of retaliation. This matter is not concluded, Morrison intervened. Mr. Hale, we are leaving. Federal agents, not event security, then formed an escort to remove the subject from the venue. His objections ceased as the doors shut. Lena stumbled, attempting to follow. Victor, wait! She pleaded, "I will come with you." He did not acknowledge her. She was left isolated, the focus of 800 observers as her circumstances disintegrated publicly. The acute awareness of her total loss induced an instantaneous psychological collapse. An animalistic cry escaped her before she fled the room. Arya observed, assessing her own internal state for any emotional response, satisfaction, empathy, but found only an affective void. The silence was then replaced by a cacophony of urgent communication as the directors convened in a state of alarm. Jessica materialized at her side. "An immediate exit is required," she urged. "Media is en route." Marco indicated the main entrance, where camera flashes and overwhelmed security were visible. "The media has arrived. Is there a secondary egress?" "This way." Dante's hand on her back provided firm guidance through the crowd of onlookers. They navigated a mass of individuals reacting to the sudden power vacuum. Dante's progress was steady and direct, unaffected by the surrounding turmoil. They located a service corridor, descended 2 flights of stairs, and emerged into a discreet alley where a vehicle was waiting. "How were you aware?" Arya began, her question trailing off. "I account for contingencies," Dante stated plainly. They entered the sedan, Marco with them, Jessica in the front. The car merged with traffic just as the press converged on their exit point. A profound silence permeated the vehicle initially. Arya observed the passing city lights, her cognitive state marked by the effort to process the recent events. The objective was complete, yet she experienced a distinct emotional void. Marco was the first to speak. "A work of art," he remarked with admiration. "Truly flawless." His expression during the presentation shift was remarkable. I anticipated a cardiac event. Furthermore, Jessica has confessed to involving the federal agents. Marco says, "I may have implied the event would hold professional significance." Arya's focus was fixed, her thoughts racing. "You orchestrated their presence." "I orchestrate contingencies. Their attendance was their own decision." A slight smile formed on Jessica's lips. "But I did suggest that tardiness might result in missing the climax." Marco's admiration was evident. "Your capabilities are formidable. I appreciate the acknowledgement." Another silence ensued. Arya's mobile device vibrated continuously in her bag, a call she chose to ignore. "What is our destination?" she eventually inquired. "A secure location," Dante answered, "to prepare for the subsequent phase of the conflict." "The primary conflict?" Arya questioned, her tone reflecting confusion. "That was merely the overture," Jessica stated. "The main proceeding commences tomorrow. Anticipate litigation, federal investigations, depositions. This is the stage of escalation." "What level of escalation?" "The highest level. Victor will deploy his full financial resources against us. His legal team will protract the process indefinitely. The board will fracture and investors will flee. The entire corporate structure may collapse prior to any judicial review." A visceral fear manifested in Arya's physical state. "The corporation could actually fail?" "It is a high probability." Jessica reoriented herself to face Arya directly. "Will that present a complication for you?" "I am uncertain." Arya visualized the uninvolved employees, administrators, researchers, all staff dissociated from Victor's transgressions. "All those non-complicit individuals will face unemployment," she vocalized, her volume significantly reduced. "That entity was already failing," Marco retorted. "The company has been hemorrhaging capital for 2 quarters. Victor was falsifying financial records to conceal the deficits. Your action only accelerated the inevitable. But nevertheless, there is no nevertheless, Dante interrupted, his tone low but absolute. You cannot rescue a drowning subject who is pulling you under. Victor constructed an edifice on deception. You merely dismantled it before it collapsed and terminated you and everyone within. The vehicle came to a smooth stop before a structure lacking any identification. Dante exited and extended his hand. She accepted it, allowing him to lead her. The location was clearly private, its sole visible feature a security agent who offered Dante a deferential nod. The environment was a center of influence, with dark wood paneling and aged leather furnishings, designed for discreet planning and the sound of ice in high-value spirits. Dante guided them into a secluded room. A selection of bread, fruit, and cheese was set on the table, a tacit acknowledgement that the conflict required sustenance. Arya sank into a chair, her gaze vacant on the food, the concept of eating seeming grotesque. You require this? Dante insisted, placing a glass of amber liquid before her. Adrenaline is a finite resource. I am functional. No, you are not. Consume it. She complied. The whiskey was premium, its clean heat severing her emotional inertia, leaving a residual warmth. Marco collapsed into a chair. I cannot process its reality. I anticipated it, but witnessing it. Jessica's voice, like fracturing glass, cut through his statement. We have not accomplished anything. Tonight was merely a theatrical opening. The difficult phase begins now. Arya's voice when she spoke was faint. That was not the difficult phase. That, Jessica answered, her focus already on her tablet, was performance. A necessary, gratifying performance, but only the initial move. Legal documents scrolled across the screen. By Monday, this conflict enters the judicial system. Victor's counsel will initiate an overwhelming assault. We will encounter countersuits, motions for dismissal, and accusations of NDA breaches. They will portray you as an embittered, unstable former spouse, fabricating narratives for revenge. But evidence exists. Evidence they will manipulate. Evidence they will claim is fraudulent. Evidence they will assert was co-authored or is shielded by spousal privilege. Jessica glanced up from the illuminated display for a brief moment. I possess no doubt regarding our eventual success, Jessica declared. However, it will be a prolonged, brutal conflict. Project a timeline of months, possibly years, and it will be savage. The true cost of her retribution descended on Arya with a suffocating gravity. She had been so fixated on this single event, on dismantling Victor, that the aftermath had never been considered. I cannot, she began, her voice constricting. I cannot sustain this for years. Yo, you will not be required to, Dante stated from across the chamber. Not in isolation. Her gaze met his. He was observing her, leaning against a wall, his look intense and unwavering. What is the meaning of that? She inquired. It means you are no longer the victim. You possess assets, protection, and a strategic counsel here. He gestured toward Marco and Jessica. The individual who fled Victor's residence 6 weeks ago is gone. You have been reconditioned. Reconditioned into what? An asset. The term was palpable in the silence. Arya processed it, sensing its implication. An asset. Was that her current designation? The moment was broken by the vibration of Marco's phone. He produced a soft laugh. You must observe this. Victor is in federal custody. There was a leak. Images are already circulating online. He presented his device, displaying a low-resolution image of Victor in a dark vehicle, his face a mask of rage or perhaps dark terror. Arya awaited a corresponding emotional response: satisfaction, justice, peace. Internally, however, there was only a profound stillness. I am going outside, she announced abruptly, rising. I require air. Arya, Dante began, I am stable. Just allow me a moment. She had exited the room before he could continue. From a small, concealed terrace, a garden was visible below. So meticulously landscaped, it resembled an illusion. Resting on the railing, Arya found the air difficult to inhale. It was concluded. Victor was neutralized. She had reclaimed her name, her professional legacy, her identity. Why then did this success feel so akin to a total, meaningful loss? A door opened behind her. She did not turn. Dante, I require solitude. That is not an option. Our agreement mandates I prevent you from any irrational actions. His tone was nonchalant, but as he moved to her side, his expression held genuine concern. What is transpiring within your thoughts? Nothing. And the apocalypse. Arya's focus stayed on the garden. I anticipated a different emotional state. In what way? Vindicated, empowered, anything other than this. Finally, she turned, allowing him to see the devastation in her eyes. I have just publicly annihilated my husband before 400 individuals. I have reduced his corporation, his reputation, and his entire life's work to utter ruin. I should be experiencing pure elation. And you are not? He warranted every second of it. That was not my inquiry. A moment of silence expanded between them. I feel a void, as if I incinerated my own residence to eliminate a single insect. Did you ever have an authentic attachment to him? Dante's question was clinical, sharp, and direct. Genuinely, I believed I did. 5 years ago, on our wedding day, I was convinced. She cut off the sentence. What I was convinced of then is no longer relevant. It is relevant if it continues to consume you internally. Arya returned her gaze to the perfect garden. I was attached to the persona I believed he was, the one who proposed a partnership, a shared reality, the one who truly perceived me. A harsh laugh escaped her. It is now apparent that persona was an illusion. I was merely an object of convenience for him, an instrument to be utilized and exchanged for a more current version. Lena is not a superior model. She is younger, more malleable. She is not a competitor. Her knuckles whitened on the iron railing. She will not challenge his perceived genius or contest his narrative. And she won't serve as a persistent reminder that he is not the prodigy the world believes him to be. For what it's worth, Dante said softly, you are superior to 100 of her. That is meaningless when my own husband holds the opposing view. They stood as the city's ambient noise surrounded them, a composition of traffic and life, a world entirely apathetic to the fracturing of hers. I have terminated men, Dante said, the admission released into the quiet. Arya's head turned sharply toward him. What? A long time ago, while establishing my enterprise, I eliminated men who obstructed my path, directly, with my own hands. His face was impassive, unreadable. Do you wish to know the subsequent emotional state? No. Avoid. the same one you are experiencing now, because retribution does not fill the chasm that betrayal creates. It only heightens your awareness of its depth. Arya could only stare, his words making it difficult to breathe. Why are you disclosing this to me? Because it is necessary for you to know this sensation is not a sign of psychosis. You invested 5 years of your life in a future with a man who discarded it. Destroying his world will not repair yours. It only ensures he cannot shatter it again. My emotional core is not shattered, Arya stated, the words an automatic hollow response. Are you certain of that? Her mouth opened with a ready defense, then closed. Was she? The rage had served as her primary motivation for so long, the singular focus to reclaim her life so all-consuming that she had never examined the damage it caused. I no longer know, she finally conceded in a whisper. I have no comprehension of my own feelings. Dante gave a slow nod. That is the first truthful statement. Is this the part where you offer sagacious advice? Assure me that conditions improve? No. This is the part where I inform you that conditions change. The pain alters its form. The anger subsides. Then one day you will notice you have passed an entire day without thinking of the individual who harmed you. He paused. But that requires time. For tonight, you have my authorization to be a complete and utter wreck. Despite the situation, Arya said, you are inept at motivational speaking. I communicate that to people consistently. They rarely believe me. The door opened once more, and Marco appeared. Apologies for the interruption, but Jessica states we must formulate decisions for Monday. Additionally, the press is aware of your location. You have approximately 20 minutes before the area is inundated. Dante swore under his breath. How? A valet recognized the vehicle, checked the registration. You are familiar with the protocol. Arya composed herself, the facade of control returning flawlessly. What are the decisions? Whether we file on Monday morning or delay, issue a public statement or maintain silence, and whether you prefer a rapid, clean settlement or if you are prepared for a protracted, brutal war. Model? Marco's expression registered clear sympathy. A significant decision. 5 minutes, Dante stated, a quiet directive. Marco exited. Arya initiated controlled breathing. We file on Monday. I will provide a brief, affectless statement. I am seeking a settlement. I will not commit the next 2 years of my existence to litigation. You're certain of this course? No. But it is the one we are taking. She met his gaze directly. Thank you for this evening, for everything. Our arrangement was clear. We had a contract. This, her gesture encompassed the situation. This became something else. Dante's entire demeanor shifted, becoming guarded, his state unreadable. We should depart. Jessica is likely drafting the statement now. His assessment was correct. In the suite, Jessica's fingers moved with high velocity across her tablet. Here is the narrative, she announced without looking up. Mrs. Stone expresses regret that a private matter is now public, but she affirms her claims and will see this resolved via appropriate legal avenues. It is sterile, detached, and offers no angle for attack, Arya affirmed. Perfect. Disseminate it tonight. Let them process it over the weekend. We assume an offensive posture Monday. Jessica finally raised her head. You must disappear for several days, a location inaccessible to the media. Allow the initial impact to dissipate. I have a place, Dante interjected. Upstate, it is isolated and completely secure. I cannot simply flee. You can and you must, Jessica countered. This city will be the last environment you'll want to occupy for the next 72 hours. It will descend into a circus. Marco's phone vibrated intensely on the table. He viewed the screen, his expression tensing. She is correct. The internet has erupted. You are a global trending topic. A meme has already been generated. A meme? Yes. The expression on Victor's face during the screen reveal. It's inadvisable for you to view it. A strange, brittle laugh escaped Arya. The sound was incongruous, but the release of acute tension was necessary. Fine, she stated. All right, I'll go upstate. I will become a ghost, but the duration will be short. It is all the time required, Jessica assured her. Afterward, your visibility will be necessary to project an image of psychological fortitude. The subsequent hour was a flurry of tactical maneuvers. Jessica refined the narrative, transmitting it to 3 wire services and reactivating Arya's social media to post it. Marco managed the media onslaught, repeating the same sanitized, approved statements to all reporters. Dante, in parallel, secured the upstate sanctuary through means Arya chose not to scrutinize. Their departure through a service exit to a waiting vehicle occurred after midnight. Arya was hollowed by a profound psychic weariness that results only from high-stakes emotional conflict. The journey to Dante's apartment was characterized by a heavy silence. Marco remained behind. Jessica was delivered to her law firm. She had claimed more work was necessary, that sleep was a luxury for those not billing hourly. Inside his residence, Arya removed her heels, collapsing onto the sofa. The garment that had served as psychological armor now felt like a constricting cage. She felt a compulsion to be free of the dress, the evening, her own skin. I must change, she said, her voice diminished. Take all the time you require. In the bedroom, her fingers fumbled with the zipper. She had maintained composure through the plan's execution and the chaotic fallout. Here, in isolation, she perceived the fractures in her psyche. In sleepwear, her face cleansed of its cosmetic mask, she could not meet her own reflection. When she re-emerged, Dante had also changed, his suit replaced by jeans and a t-shirt, making him appear younger, less threatening. He had poured 2 glasses of wine, his focus on the sprawling urban lights. Sleep is elusive? She inquired. It is. For you? A system flooded with adrenaline. He offered her a glass. They stood in mutual silence, observing the city that had just witnessed her systematic dismantling of Victor's world. Do you experience any regret? Dante finally broke the stillness. Regarding which part? All of it. The gala, the public demolition, the method you used to neutralize him. Arya processed his query. No, he warranted that outcome and more, but I lament the necessity of it. I wish he had been the man I believed I was marrying. I wish the past 5 years of my life were not predicated on a total deception. She tasted the wine. I wish my awareness had come sooner. Had it, you would not be the person you are now. And is that meant as a form of consolation? It is meant as a statement of fact. Another silence lapsed between them. A deep exhaustion permeated Arya's being, yet it was threaded with a peculiar, vibrant energy, as if she were suspended between collapse and an impulse to flee. What is the next phase? She asked aloud. Now you initiate recovery. You reconstruct. You become the individual you were meant to be, not the version he conditioned. That sounds ideal in theory. It is brutal in practice, Dante conceded. But you will succeed. You have a pattern of achieving the impossible. Arya placed her empty glass on his counter and faced him. Why are you truly providing this assistance? She questioned. The genuine motive, beyond the business arrangement, beyond partnership. Why? Dante remained quiet for a long, weighty interval. He was processing a memory of a past trauma. A decade prior, he had occupied a similar psychological precipice, shattered by betrayal, possessing sufficient rage to incinerate the world and the cold precision to do so effectively. He was forced to navigate that ordeal alone. He is ensuring she will not. Is that the sole reason? It is. The answer felt incomplete to her. She could perceive a truth he concealed, but lacked the emotional resources to extract it. Thank you, she repeated. Do not thank me. We are allies. Partners do not receive thanks for executing necessary actions. Is that what this is? Fulfilling a duty? A fissure appeared in his composure. No, but I currently lack a term for what it is. His candor was disarming. Arya observed his features, the hard planes, the shadowed eyes, and the rigid self-control that would occasionally fracture, revealing something authentic beneath. All right, she finally exhaled. When you identified the term for it. A silent accord formed between them above the distant city lights. The future presented as a daunting void, yet it resonated with an unlikely sense of potential. Then her phone's vibration disrupted the quiet. And again, she retrieved it. 53 new messages, 112 notifications, 3 missed calls from anonymous numbers. You should deactivate that device, Dante advised. I know, yet she scrolled through the alerts. Most were from a life she had just incinerated. Former colleagues, estranged associates, individuals who had vanished when she became Victor's spouse. They were now re-emerging, offering insincere support, seeking information, or merely desiring proximity to the spectacle. A single name arrested her attention. Catherine, the board member who challenged Victor at the gala. 2 words. Call Monday. What is it? Dante asked. The board wishes to speak with me. Regarding what? The specifics are unknown, but it must concern the company's future. Does the company's future still hold any significance for you? Arya had to genuinely consider the question. Did it? She had co-founded that company from its inception, invested 5 years of her life in it. But it was also the gilded prison that had confined her, a monument to Victor's narcissism built with her own effort. I do not know, she admitted, her voice unvarnished and candid. Ask me again after I have had some sleep. A reasonable stipulation. She powered off her phone, the device landing on the counter with quiet finality. I am going to attempt to obtain what sleep is possible, she announced. Alert me if the world ends. The world has already ended, Dante responded. This is merely the aftermath. A genuine laugh escaped Arya, unlike the prior fractured one. You are truly unskilled at this. I am aware. She left him by the large window and located the bedroom. The sheets were cool, the bed a small sanctuary. She closed her eyes, seeking unconsciousness. It did not arrive. Instead, the evening's events replayed in a relentless, distressing loop. Victor's expression at the reveal, Lena's devastated face, the toxic whispers, and the moment she reclaimed her agency. She had achieved total victory. So why did this victory feel so psychologically eviscerating? Arya woke to sunlight penetrating curtains she had neglected to close. A persistent ache pulsed behind her eyes. Her mouth held the taste of stale wine and regret. She made an automatic gesture for her phone before recalling its deactivated state. A prudent decision. Her past self had demonstrated foresight. The apartment was utterly silent. She moved to the kitchen, finding a note on the counter in Dante's exact script. Managing matters. Coffee is fresh. Keep the phone off. D. The coffee remained hot. Arya poured a mug, carrying it to the window. A Sunday morning in the city presented an entirely deceptive peacefulness. People with dogs, joggers on the paths, couples en route to brunch. As if the world had not just observed her publicly destroying her husband's reputation on a live broadcast. One might expect a state of celebration, victory, justice, such constructs. Instead, she experienced only an exhaustion that penetrated to her core. Her phone rested on the counter, an inert but potent object. She eventually capitulated and powered it on. A digital deluge was instantaneous, hundreds, perhaps thousands of notifications. Her inbox was overwhelmed. Her social media, dormant for years, had erupted with new followers, comments from strangers, and marriage proposals from men who evidently found spousal revenge to be an attractive trait. She was scrolling with a sense of detachment when one email caused her to freeze. The subject line was direct. We need to talk. Catherine Reeves, Hale Enterprises Board. Arya opened it. Ms. Stone, you are undoubtedly inundated, so I will be brief. The board held an emergency session last night. Victor is on indefinite leave, pending an SEC investigation. A new stimulus was required. We need a leader. The subject, Arya, processed the text from Catherine Reeves 3 times, a common sign of cognitive assimilation under duress. The offer presented a paradigm shift. From shadow operator to a primary agent, the role remained undefined. Savior, scapegoat, or successor, her catatonia was interrupted by the return of her caretaker, Dante. He noted her re-engagement with the communication device. His statement, "You don't own me," the roar was a reflexive assertion of autonomy. His counter was a clinical reminder of her compromised state due to recent trauma. His query about the fire was a prompt for her to articulate the new crisis. Her response was nonverbal, transferring the stimulus to him. His facial expression remained neutral, a practiced mask. His question was direct. Are you going? Subject response, I don't know. The subject solicited the caretaker's analysis. Should I? His response deferred agency, not my decision to make. He then guided her toward introspection. Dante's assessment of Catherine Reeves was that of a high-functioning predator who does not permit sentiment to influence strategy. Her communication was identified as a tactical maneuver. The subject queried the beneficiary of the maneuver. For her or for me? The caretaker hypothesized a symbiotic outcome. His subsequent actions, dispensing sustenance, were a move to regulate the subject's physiological state. The core question was reframed. Did the subject desire the unknown objective? His counsel was to engage in reconnaissance only, collect data, but commit to nothing. His final directive to eat was a clinical observation. Compromised physiological states often lead to poor strategic outcomes. The subject's rapid consumption of food confirmed a state of severe homeostatic neglect. They consumed their meal in a silence indicative of a high-trust pairing. The caretaker, Dante, then delivered a status update. The misinformation campaign had been effective. Public opinion was largely controlled. Predictable counter-narratives portraying the subject as unstable had emerged. Regarding the antagonist, Victor, he was under total surveillance and his support structure was collapsing. The board was engaging in prophylactic reputation management. Dante's prognosis was grimly certain. He's done, Arya. Victor's social and professional capital was now toxic. The subject verbalized her expected response. Good. It was followed by an admission of anhedonia. Is it wrong that I don't feel any satisfaction? The caretaker normalized this reaction, labeling it as evidence of a functioning moral compass, unlike that of a true sociopath. The subject had long fantasized about the antagonist's total collapse. Yet a significant gap exists between the fantasy of an event and the psychic fallout of its reality. As Dante administered more caffeine, he verbalized her internal state. You shared 5 years of your life with him. He diagnosed the condition as a persistent cognitive artifact, a trauma bond that memory preserves. The subject processed this, questioning the etiology of Victor's pathology. Was it latent or activated by power? She announced her decision. My meeting with Catherine is confirmed. The caretaker initiated a risk assessment. You're sure it isn't a setup? The subject's rationale was that direct engagement was the only method to diagnose Catherine's intent and avoid a potential trap. Dante began clearing the table, a ritual to restore order. Staying frozen is a quick route to insanity, the subject stated, framing her choice as a necessary action to prevent psychological paralysis. Dante referenced their pre-established egress plan, adapting it to the new variable. We can still go after you see her. He laid out a revised timeline, engagement with Catherine at 1000 hours, legal processing at noon, and extraction by 1400. He then offered an abort option, a final test of her resolve. Unless you want to call the meeting off. Subject's response was firm. No, I need to know what she wants. Then we'll find out, he affirmed. The remainder of their Sunday was a period of heightened anxiety. The subject's attempts at distraction failed. She reverted to her primary data set, the digital architecture of her 5 years of labor for Hale Enterprises. She reviewed the complex business strategies and financial models, the core structure of an empire Victor had falsely claimed as his own intellectual property. With her perception no longer distorted by emotional attachment, she identified the work's inherent brilliance. The logic behind Victor's concealment of her became clinically obvious. Exposing the true architect would invalidate his entire power structure. The caretaker's soft inquiry, "What are you up to?" broke her concentration. Just reminding myself of my worth, she replied. A minor facial contraction on his part suggested approval. Don't forget it by tomorrow. That night, the subject achieved REM sleep. It was not restorative, but functional. Her dreams were populated by contractual clauses and a projection of a future self, powerful, precise, and lethally sharp. The Monday morning transition was abrupt. The subject's grooming ritual was deliberate. She selected a charcoal suit, a sartorial choice meant to project authority and emotional detachment. It was the armor for a transaction. Dante navigated them to the designated meeting zone, a secure location away from media observation. Catherine had selected a downtown law firm, a neutral territory under her control. Want me to come up? Dante offered close support. No, I have to walk this path by myself. the subject stated, asserting her need for autonomy. Signal if you need extraction. A fleeting smile crossed Arya's lips, betraying her physiological stress. It's a meeting, not a kidnapping. He countered, with Catherine Reeves. That line gets blurry fast. The law firm occupied the building's apex. Catherine's office, the 48th floor, provided a commanding tactical view. She rose as Arya entered, a subject with a severe, angular presentation. Ms. Stone, I appreciate you coming. Ms. Reeves, please, Catherine. Catherine dispensed with social ritual, pouring coffee without offering. I won't mince word, she began. Hale Enterprises is in a nosedive. She presented the data. Victor's disappearance, regulatory pressure, a loss of 3 key investors, and a 40% stock value collapse. I've been following the developments, Arya confirmed. What you might not know, Catherine continued, is that the board held a 6-hour emergency meeting last night. We reviewed all evidence from Jessica Chen. We consulted legal, financial, and crisis management. Catherine's posture was one of cold, objective assessment. The unanimous conclusion is that Victor built this company on a bedrock of your intellectual property. The genius was never his. That's correct. Which means, Catherine continued, her gaze clinical, from every relevant standpoint, you have the most legitimate claim to operate this company. The offer was then presented. We are offering you the role of Chief Executive Officer. The subject had anticipated this outcome, yet the verbal confirmation triggered a visceral response. Her inquiry was a single word. Why? Because you're the only person alive who can save it. You have the institutional knowledge. You were its architect. You can be its salvation, Catherine concluded. The subject proposed an alternative. Or I could watch it all burn down. You could, Catherine conceded. Dante Moretti would hire you. She then deployed a psychological tactic targeting the subject's ego. But do you want Victor's collapse to destroy 5 years of your own creation? The attack on her sense of ownership was precise. Arya pivoted to logistics. What are the terms? Catherine presented a file. The CEO title, total executive power, a salary in the 7-figure range, plus a substantial stock package. The board will be functionally subordinate to you. Arya opened the folder. The compensation was structured to be overwhelming, a tool for world building. And what's your angle? She questioned, probing for motive. A solvent company, a competent CEO, and on a personal note, Catherine's smile was predatory. The satisfaction of watching the men who enabled Victor take orders from the woman they rendered invisible. You never made me invisible, Arya corrected. No, but I was complicit through silence. I saw the patterns and asked no questions. Catherine's expression hardened. Consider this my apology and my attempt at restitution. Arya observed the older woman, processing the calculated confession. So Catherine Reeves, a strategist who despised inefficiency, was executing a power play. I'll need some time, Arya countered, a bid for control. Catherine's reply was swift. Naturally, but we require a decision by week's end. The entity is hemorrhaging capital and credibility. Arya acknowledged the parameters. Catherine intensified the pressure. You need to know that if you take this, you are walking into a war. The media, Victor's loyalists, internal factions, they will all try to destroy you. It will be hell. Arya responded, I'm ready for that. Catherine concluded with a humorless laugh. a final psychological test. Are you? Because Saturday night was just the opening act. This becomes the subject's reality, a perpetual conflict, a constant need to validate her position against accusations of impropriety, sexual coercion, manipulation, or any narrative that provides psychological comfort to her detractors. Catherine's tone was clinical. I am presenting a position of power, Arya, but such authority is a burden, and rivals will perpetually seek to displace you. Arya recalled the gala, the exposure to 400 observers to reclaim her identity, and the subsequent psychological void, as if retribution was merely a prelude, not the complete catharsis. She then posed an inquiry. A question, if I may. If I accept this role, stabilize the entity, and restore its public image, what is Victor's disposition? He becomes a case study in social ruin while you emerge from the wreckage with the very assets he attempted to expropriate. A subtle smirk formed on Catherine's lips. I had assessed that retribution was your primary objective. It was, but I am beginning to formulate a superior outcome. Which is? Constructing an entity that is solely my own, not salvaging Victor's enterprise, not repairing his company. Mine. Arya closed the folder with a quiet, deliberate motion. I acknowledge the offer, Catherine, truly, but this is not my projected trajectory. Catherine's eyebrows rose, showing a brief moment of authentic surprise. You're refusing the CEO position at a Fortune 500 corporation? I am refusing the CEO position at Victor's corporation. The distinction is critical. Arya rose to her feet. I was in his shadow for 5 years. I will not spend the next 5 managing his collapse. Even if total systemic failure occurs, even then. A profound sense of equilibrium permeated Arya's psyche. It could be classified as resolve, or perhaps the clarity that accompanies confronting a core truth. I constructed it once, I can engineer a superior version. Catherine observed her for a long, silent interval before an authentic, surprised laugh emerged. You know, I believe you may actually achieve it. She stood and extended her hand. For the record, I believe you are committing an error, but I must commend the conviction. Arya returned the handshake firmly. Thank you for the opportunity. Should you reconsider? I will not. Exiting Catherine's office, she experienced a sense of weightlessness she hadn't felt in years. In the elevator, she retrieved her phone, texting Dante. It is concluded. Meet me at ground level. He was already waiting, positioned against the car, as if time was not a factor. What was the outcome? He inquired. I was offered the chief executive officer position. A brief silence ensued. I declined it. While Dante's facial expression remained neutral, his eyes showed a subtle shift. On what grounds? I have no inclination to salvage Victor's deteriorating empire. I plan to build my own from its remnants. She entered the vehicle. Something that is mine from its inception. The engine started as Dante turned the ignition. And what is the configuration of that? Its form is still conceptual, but I will give it structure. They proceeded to Jessica's office, where a volume of legal documents awaited. Divorce filings, intellectual property claims, asset declarations. Arya's hand began to ache from signing one relentless document after another. This is merely the initial maneuver, Jessica stated. Victor's counsel will contest every article. We could be mired in this for months. Oh, I'm prepared for that. And you're firm in your decision to decline the CEO role? It would have provided significant leverage in these negotiations. I'm firm. Jessica's stare was sharp and diagnostic. As you wish, it is your decision, but my professional assessment is that you are executing an exceptionally high-risk strategy. You are the third individual to inform me of that today. Perhaps you should process that data. Or perhaps I am the only one with a clear perception, while all others operate under a delusion. Arya applied her final signature to the document. What is the next phase? Now we await Victor's response. He has 30 days. Following that are discovery and depositions. The entire Grimm protocol. Jessica organized the papers into neat stacks. My recommendation, vanish. Allow the media attention to dissipate. Let Victor's anxiety escalate. That is already the strategy. We are departing the city. Excellent. Remain absent for as long as possible. Return when you are prepared for the engagement. The transit to the countryside required 3 hours. Arya observed the urban landscape transition to suburbs, then to open terrain, and finally to dense forest. Dante's safe house was a contemporary lakeside structure, minimalist and refined. Composed of glass and timber, it looked out upon an uninterrupted water horizon. Is this where you retreat from observation? Arya asked, and they approached. This is where I come to recenter on primary objectives. The interior was Spartan and orderly, functional without being opulent. A fire was prepared in the fireplace. The kitchen was supplied, and the bathroom contained fresh linens. What is the duration of our stay? Arya asked quietly. As long as is necessary. She moved toward the window. The lake was a flawless mirror, a steady reflection of the atmosphere. No surveillance, no recording devices, no inquiries she was not equipped to address. I believe the expected emotion is relief, she noted, her voice low, but you do not feel it. I feel like a person of interest. You are not fleeing, you are repositioning. Dante moved to stand beside her. There is a fundamental difference. Is there? Fleeing is ceding territory. Repositioning is a tactical withdrawal. He paused. Now describe precisely what transpired in Catherine's office. Arya recounted the entire event, the proposal, its conditions, and her direct refusal. While speaking, she observed his reflection, attempting to decipher the cognition behind his composure. Do you believe I made an error? She asked upon finishing. No. I believe you made the correct choice, but for flawed reasons. What is the meaning of that statement? It means rejecting the CEO title to construct your own entity is an indicator of psychological strength. Rejecting it due to a fear of potential failure is not. Arya pivoted to face him directly. I am not afraid. Are you certain? No, I'm simply. The words failed her. Fear of what? Of failure or of succeeding? Of becoming a facsimile of Victor? I am done being his construct, accepting that position, managing his company. Even if I achieved immense success, I would remain in his shadow, the woman who restored Victor Hale's legacy. I require my own. I understand, Dante said. Is that the full extent of it? I understand. What alternative response would you expect? That you are incorrect? I do not believe you are. That you should alter your decision, you will not. The corner of his mouth shifted into a slight smile. You have committed to a course of action. Now you must accept the consequences. How insightful. I have my moments. They allowed the remainder of the day to pass in quiet acclamation. Arya traversed the silent residence, her luggage stored, but her mind in a state of chaos. The lack of stimuli felt foreign. After 5 years of intense focus on a singular objective, she had lost the ability for simple being, and the inactivity produced a sense of guilt. As dusk began to color the sky, her agitation prevailed. Dante located her on the deck, a dark silhouette against the fading light. "Is the silence affecting you?" he asked. "I cannot stop analyzing what comes next. After the legal proceedings, after the turmoil subsides." She wrapped her arms around her torso. "I spent 5 years actualizing Victor's vision. What is mine? What do you want it to be? I don't know. Something that has an impact. Something that provides assistance." A sharp, mirthless laugh escaped her. "It sounds remarkably naive," he responded. "It sounds human. My core competency is strategy, perceiving tactical angles others miss, resolving problems others cannot. But for 5 years, I applied this skill to further enrich men who were already wealthy." Her voice gained a new, hard resolve. "Perhaps it is time for a new type of engagement, a different objective." "Such as?" I'm not certain yet. Perhaps consulting for entities nearing collapse. Startups with innovative concepts but lacking business acumen. Companies led by women, by minorities, the ones the established networks consistently ignore. The concept materialized as she vocalized it in the evening. "I could establish my own firm, small initially, highly selective, accepting only clients in whom I have genuine belief." "That is not a methodology for rapid wealth acquisition." "It does not need to be, not initially. I will have the settlement from Victor. I have my own capital." She turned, her eyes meeting his in the encroaching darkness. "And I will have a partner who once stated he wished to build something with me." "I did make that statement." "Was it genuine?" "I do not make statements that are not genuine." "Then act on it. Invest in me, in this concept." A genuine spark of vitality animated Arya's face, the first he had observed since the gala. "You need to legitimize your own empire. This could be the mechanism." Dante simply observed her, his expression unreadable in the growing dark. "So, what is the proposition?" "Strategic consulting for the undersupported. I possess the expertise, you possess the capital and network. We support the innovators, the women and minorities that venture capital funds disregard. We take equity, not fees. When they succeed, we succeed. And when they fail, we gather data." The startup ecosystem has approximately a 30% success rate. But with effective strategic intervention, that figure increases to 60. I have analyzed the data. Arya could feel the framework of a new existence forming around her in the quiet, an existence that was finally her own. Our selection process would be stringent, supporting only entities with validated potential. When we succeed, the success will be significant. And if we do not, then we fail concurrently. Dante remained silent for a long interval as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Agreed," he said at last. "Agreed. I am in. But I have 2 stipulations." "State them." "First, we are equitable partners. Equal share, equal authority." "My role is not one of passive financial support." "Understood." "Furthermore," the subject paused for effect, "you must excise the cognitive distortion that you are inadequate for this undertaking. You previously constructed an empire from nothing. You will do so again. contingent on your own self-validation. The psychic tension in Arya's chest palpably released. Agreed. Their handshake was a definitive, non-verbal contract, signaling a new phase. The subsequent days were a fugue state of productivity. Propelled by Dante's potent coffee, their work cycle spanned from dawn until midnight, forging business strategies, vetting targets, and constructing financial projections. Arya exhibited a level of drive dormant for years. This was not Victor's domain, nor a vicarious ambition. This was her own. On Wednesday, an external stressor breached their isolation. Victor's countersuit has been filed, Jessica reported, her tone clinical. The contents are hostile. Specified the degree of hostility. He is constructing a narrative of you as a premeditated fraud, alleging you concealed your contributions to evade culpability. He posits that your intellectual capital belongs to him, remunerated by the marriage and lifestyle he provided. Jessica's voice was devoid of emotion. He is contesting every claim. This was anticipated. Affirmative, but this will be a protracted, vicious conflict. His legal counsel is formidable. This case will proceed to trial, Arya. The duration could be a year, possibly longer. Arya's gaze met Dante's, who observed her from across the space. Very well. She exhaled. We proceed to conflict. Are you certain? A settlement remains a viable option. Accept the financial compensation, agree to a non-disclosure, and withdraw. My resolve is firm. As you wish, I will prepare for litigation. A notable silence persisted on the line. A final point. Your refusal of the CEO position is now public knowledge. It is widely disseminated. Public opinion is polarized between viewing you as irrational or principled. And your assessment? My assessment is that you are my client, and my objective is your victory. The communication terminated, leaving Arya in a heavy quiet. A year of legal warfare. A year of Victor's legal team performing a forensic dissection of her psyche. A year of public scrutiny. Any reevaluation? Dante's voice was a low-frequency query. None. Only a new awareness of the war's true scale. She stood, stretching to displace the immense psychological weight. Her declaration of intent was met with his tactical response. A dossier of clients for their joint venture. The document presented 3 enterprises, each led by women, each navigating strategic and expansionary challenges. This, he suggested, would be her new operational theater. Arya's eyes scanned the entries. An ethical apparel company, a firm developing accessibility software, and a food charity serving marginalized districts. These were not mere business opportunities. They were ideological statements. He met her gaze, a silent acknowledgement that their intrinsic value was the basis for their selection. Her perception of him clarified in that moment. Dante Moretti, an operative from the criminal underworld, had infiltrated her life through a contrived engagement, only to become an unlikely protector, a confidant, and something far more psychologically complex. A simple expression of thanks seemed profoundly inadequate. He dismissed it, categorizing his action as a foundational element of their pact. Yet this felt greater than any formal agreement. It was the psychological impact of being acknowledged after 5 years of systemic invalidation. Sleep did not manifest for Arya that night. She located Dante on the balcony, his focus on the lake's dark, inert surface. He was also awake, processing the mechanics of a secondary, more covert operation. The strategy he was formulating was subtle. The clinical deconstruction of Victor's public persona, an action designed to be untraceable. Their attorney, Jessica, was bound by legal ethics. He was not. He then presented her with a choice, a final opportunity to mandate that his tactics remain within legal bounds. She recognized the socially prescribed response was to allow the judicial process to unfold. However, she exhibited profound fatigue with a corrupt system that enabled Victor to act without accountability. She joined him at the railing, the cold metal, a physical counterpoint to her rising emotional temperature. The intelligence he alluded to was specific: falsified financial records, evidence of shell companies, and a distinct pattern of intellectual property theft. Arya, it appeared, was merely the latest in a series of creative intellects he had methodically erased. Dante's tone was clinical. Victor's entire operational history was a predatory cycle requiring termination. The consequence for him would be complete professional and social annihilation. Dante showed no concern for the ethical calculus. Arya understood his moral compass was his own, but the directive to proceed had to be hers. Assessing her own trauma against the impending conflict, her answer was clear. She instructed him to unearth every concealed transgression. Her mandate given, they remained in the dense silence as moonlight fractured across the water. In the city, Victor's operational stability was beginning to degrade as his legal counsel grew agitated. Here, in the quiet, Arya was constructing a new foundation, one that was entirely her own. A 3-month period passed in a fugue of legal preparation, opposition analysis, and the systematic building of her consultancy. The recurring stress dreams of Victor's public betrayal ceased. By the 12th week, she had lost track of its days. Her company, Stone Strategic, a name Dante proposed to reframe her narrative, had secured its initial clients. The ethical fashion house exceeded its financial targets. The accessibility software firm successfully closed its Series A funding round. The food program expanded its operations to 2 additional cities. Arya's personal income was nominal but increasing. More significantly, her psychological energy was now invested in meaningful work with individuals who regarded her as a peer, not an appendage of her former husband. Dante's influence served as a silent catalyst. He facilitated introductions to high-level investors, to efficient legal teams, and to financiers who engaged with her respectfully. The association with Dante Moretti carried a gravitas that her former status as Victor Hale's wife never did. Their simulated engagement proved to be an even more potent instrument. This was the one variable they managed with careful precision. The engagement was conceived as a temporary, public-facing stratagem. Yet Dante maintained the pretense in professional settings, continued to wear the simple platinum band that mirrored hers, and would occasionally fix his gaze on her with an intensity that violated the terms of their business arrangement. Arya rationalized this behavior as irrelevant, insisting she was too focused on her professional reconstruction to consider a life post-divorce. It was a well-rehearsed cognitive defense, a mechanism honed through years of survival. The notification from Jessica arrived on a Tuesday morning in early November. Arya was at her small 3-room office, analyzing data for a 4th client. Jessica's call was direct. A court date was set for January 15th, the judge desiring resolution before the end of the fiscal year. This provided a sub-2-month window for final preparations. Victor's legal team was aggressively pushing for a settlement, a clear indicator they anticipated a loss and were attempting to mitigate the damage. Arya put down her pen. The offer comprised $50 million, full ownership of her intellectual property, and a binding non-disclosure agreement to permanently suppress the narrative. $50 million for her continued erasure. 6 months prior, she might have accepted the funds and disappeared. But she was no longer that individual. not the subject who confused concealment with safety. Her rejection was immediate. $50 million was an insufficient valuation for the extent of his theft, and the NDA was a form of confinement, preventing her from warning potential future victims or claiming her own history. Arya's position was immutable. There would be no deal. They would confront him in court. Following a brief pause, Jessica concurred, recalling her to the city for the intensive 2-month preparation period. When the call ended, a profound quiet settled over the office. Outside, the city pulsed with its own covert conflicts. In 2 months, she would face Victor, and every component of the new identity she had built would be subject to litigation. A typical subject might experience a wave of acute anxiety. Instead, she exhibited a cold, heightened focus. Dante found her later at their shared residence, the same one occupied since the gala, where their fabricated bond had slowly and subtly transformed into a genuine, unspoken attachment. He confirmed Jessica had contacted him as well. The trial was scheduled for January. She was not merely functional, she was optimized, acknowledging a powerful psychological need for this final confrontation. He observed that 3 months ago, she presented as someone wishing to disappear. Now she appeared capable of incendiary action. She clarified her target was not the institution, but Victor's entire constructed persona. A valid distinction, he agreed. He had further intelligence to convey. His assets had uncovered additional data on the shell corporations, exposing Victor's standard procedure of appropriating innovations and laundering the profits. The number of his other victims was confirmed at 6, with more suspected. All had been either terminated under dubious circumstances or had vanished from their professional fields. His expression was grim. They had persuaded 3 of these individuals to provide testimony should Jessica require it. A knot of cold dread formed in Arya's stomach. He had systematically dismantled the careers of at least 6 individuals. Others were likely too intimidated to come forward. Dante clarified that this had escalated beyond a personal conflict. It was a systemic pattern of fraud that had been operational for nearly a decade. The Securities and Exchange Commission initiated a formal investigation, with the board considering potential criminal indictments for wire fraud and tax evasion. If convicted, Subject Victor faced incarceration. Subject Arya anticipated a sense of victory, but instead experienced a state of profound psychological exhaustion. She questioned the extremity of their methods. Her accomplice, Dante, expressed no such reservations. While acknowledging past regrettable actions, he did not classify this as a moral failing. To him, restoring her life while exposing a man whose empire was fundamentally unstable was not a transgression, but a restoration of equilibrium. He insisted Victor was the sole architect of his own inevitable ruin. Their function, as Dante framed it, was merely to provide the public with an unobstructed view of the collapse. Arya processed his words, contemplating the thin demarcation between justice and vengeance and the collateral subjects of her campaign. So focused on reclaiming her assets, she had not fully considered the individual who would be left in the aftermath. She then recounted a random encounter with Lena in a downtown cafe. Dante expressed clinical interest. Lena had appeared diminished and disoriented, offering a disjointed, tearful apology, insisting she was unaware of his marital status at the affair's inception. Arya assessed this as a self-serving falsehood, repeated until it functioned as subjective truth. Dante found this behavior psychologically sound, noting that subjects perpetually rewrite their personal histories to assume the role of hero, or at least to evade that of the villain. She considered if I despised her. I did not. My assessment of her was pity. At 24, she perceived herself as the protagonist of a narrative chosen by a powerful man. She was now the auxiliary female in a scandal destroying his career. Arya's focus finally met his. I once desired for her to experience suffering. That night, I wanted her to feel the precise configuration of my own trauma. But now it is observable that she was also his victim. And yet, was she entirely? She made a choice. She initiated an affair with a married man. She attended that gala in a garment valued more than a person's monthly housing cost. She could be both a casualty and a co-conspirator. Existence rarely offers a clean binary where a subject is only one or the other. Dante emptied his glass. The critical question is, does her emotional display alter your position? Arya evaluated the query. Did it? Lena's psychological pain did not negate her own. Lena's poor judgment did not absolve Victor of his far greater transgressions. No, she concluded. Nothing has changed. I am proceeding to trial. I expect to prevail, and I will ensure all parties understand the exact nature of his actions. Then your objective is clear. The subsequent 60 days were an exercise in controlled stress. Jessica subjected Arya to grueling mock trials, aggressive interrogations, and scenarios designed to test her psychological breaking points. They rehearsed her testimony until it was cognitively ingrained, deconstructing every document, message, and piece of evidence. Marco assisted by assuming the role of Victor's counsel, embodying a theatrical, condescending persona engineered to provoke her into error. So you allege to have performed all this labor, he would sneer with corrosive sarcasm, yet you never requested attribution or your name on any materials. How remarkably convenient. I was instructed it was advantageous for the company if I remained in a background role. Who instructed you? My husband, Victor. And you possess no evidence that conversation occurred. I possess 5 years of messages where he explicitly directs me to miss meetings, avoid investors, and omit my name from projects. Messages that could be construed as a spouse shielding his wife from a predatory industry, or communications that could indicate a man methodically erasing his wife's career to appropriate her achievements. Marco's simulated attacks were relentless. Jessica would interject, object, then pivot her strategy. They repeated the drills until Arya could deflect any hostile inquiry they launched. Dante was a silent observer during some sessions. Jessica argued it was optically poor for a fiancé to coach a witness, but he remained behind them, observing. Afterward, he would transport her home and allow her to debrief. I genuinely wanted to strike Marco today, she would confess. That is the intended outcome. I know. It remains infuriating. Excellent. Channel that fury on the stand. Victor's actual legal team will be 10 times more aggressive than Marco. Allow them to trigger your anger, then concentrate that intensity into surgical precision. The guidance was effective. Arya learned to forge her rage into an instrument of pure lucidity, turning their inquiries into weapons rather than letting them destabilize her. By December, she was an optimized machine. 1 week before Christmas, Victor's name appeared on her phone. After months of non-communication, Arya observed the display, nearly allowing it to go unanswered. But her curiosity prevailed. What is your objective? She asked. Arya. His voice was fractured, utterly depleted. I need to see you. There is nothing to discuss. Anything you need to communicate can be routed through Jessica. Please, just 5 minutes in person, somewhere public. She recognized the correct response was negative to terminate the call and block his number, but she heard her own voice utter, Where? The cafe, the one near our former residence. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock? Fine. 5 minutes? She severed the connection before he could respond. You cannot be serious about attending, Dante observed. He stood in the doorway, having overheard the exchange. I am. For what purpose? I need to hear his statement, the justification he has constructed, the narrative he is now telling himself in which I am the antagonist. This is a remarkably poor strategic choice. Likely, but my decision is made. Her gaze fixed on his. You can accompany me. Occupy a separate table. Ensure he initiates nothing. He will not attempt anything in a crowded venue. So there is no reason for your absence, is there? Dante sighed. Very well, but if he causes you distress, I will fracture his jaw. An agreement. The following day, Arya entered the cafe 5 minutes early, selected a conspicuous table by the window, and procured a coffee she would not consume. Victor entered at precisely 2 o'clock. He appeared physically ravaged, gaunt, his suit ill-fitting with pronounced dark circles under his eyes. He had aged a decade in 3 months. Thank you for meeting me, he began, taking a seat. You have 5 minutes. I want to settle, Jessica informed me. I declined. Arya, please, this trial will ruin us both. The media, the evidence, all the material that will be disclosed. The only thing that will be disclosed is the truth. If you fear the truth, that is a problem of your own making. Victor flinched. I made errors. I concede that. I should have credited you, should have perceived me as an equal, not a subordinate, respected my contributions, not engaged in an affair with your assistant. Arya's tone was entirely devoid of emotion. Yes, Victor, there is a significant list of things you should have done. I loved you. No, you did not. You loved my utility to you. There is a profound distinction. He was silent for a moment. I am going to lose everything, am I not? That is correct. The company, my reputation, potentially my liberty if the SEC pursues charges. That is correct, and you're comfortable with that. Arya genuinely contemplated it, processing the question. Could she witness the man she once loved be systematically dismantled? Observe his entire life reduced to ruin? This was never about your destruction, she stated, her voice a low frequency. This is remuneration for what you expropriated. 5 years of my labor, my concepts, my very identity. You wore it all as a facade. You rendered me a ghost in my own life's narrative. Then you discarded me. Her eyes met his, glacially cold. You constructed this prison yourself, Victor. I am merely the one holding the key. He sneered. I can contest this, extend it for years, make it a protracted, ugly conflict. Then have your conflict, Arya countered, rising. But you will lose. I have the documentation, the witnesses, and the one asset you could never acquire, the truth. She exited the building before he could formulate a response. Dante's vehicle was positioned across the street, a silent extraction point. She entered and he departed. Are you functional? He inquired after a pause. Actually, I am. A strange sensation of catharsis settled over Arya. Observing Victor in such a broken, vacant state had finally closed the psychological wound. He attempted to propose a settlement, she mentioned, asserted the trial would destroy us both. And what was your response? I told him he could observe the conflagration. A minor smile formed on Dante's lips. That is my girl. The phrase remained in the space. His girl. Not his collaborator, not his peer. His. Dante. I know. We must address this. Us. Whatever this dynamic is. His eyes remained fixed on the road. When the trial is concluded, he said, After the situation stabilizes, we can apply a label to it. What if I require that label now? Right now, you must focus on prevailing, on reclaiming your life, on demonstrating you are not the phantom Victor manufactured. His eyes shifted to hers. When you win, and you will win, we will discuss the next phase. The postponement should have provoked anxiety. Instead, a profound sense of calm enveloped her. One conflict at a time. She could manage that. Christmas was a subdued event. Arya was with Dante, Marco, and Jessica. An anomalous small group that felt structurally sound. They exchanged gifts and shared wine, consciously avoiding the subject of the court date just 3 weeks away. For New Year's Eve, Dante hosted a small gathering for individuals supporting Arya's new enterprise. She wore the same dark blue dress, but felt like a different subject, more resilient, more certain of her identity. As the year turned and pairs engaged in ritual kissing, Dante located her on the balcony. Formulating a resolution for the new year, he asked. Attempting to. I am never able to adhere to mine, state it anyway. I want to cease being fearful. Fearful of what? Winning, losing, of being visible. She turned to face him directly. For 5 years, I made myself diminutive because I believed that was the price of love. The subject expressed a desire for this to conclude. This is not irrational, it is adaptive. And your position? Dante showed a moment of hesitation, urban lights reflecting in his pupils. I wish to cease my self-deception regarding my motivations. And what are your motivations? His gaze met hers, a complex exchange occurring in the quiet. He then closed the distance and initiated a kiss. The act was measured, intentional, and a clear violation of your professional parameters. As he withdrew, her heart rate was markedly elevated. Our agreement! Post-trial, she articulated, her breathing shallow. My agreement, he countered. You inquired about my desires. That is the data. A slight smile formed. But your point is valid. After the verdict, upon your legal success. When this is fully resolved, we will proceed under proper conditions. And if my patience is depleted, then act accordingly. But this requires authenticity, you understand? If it proceeds, not a performance, not a strategic ploy, it must be fundamentally genuine. With that, a core psychological defense within Arya fractured. Agreed. Agreed. We will address this correctly once the legal proceedings are finished. They remained there as the gathering dispersed, their words forming a tacit agreement for a revised future. January 15th arrived with a severe cold. Arya was clad in a gray suit, a form of psychological armor, her composure a defensive shield. Jessica awaited her at the courthouse steps. Are you prepared? Her counsel inquired. As I will ever be. The courtroom was a scene of media saturation. The press section was filled beyond its limits. Victor's legal team projected an aura of high-cost assurance. The board members presented a fragmented landscape of allegiances, the loyalists, the opportunists, and the observers. At his designated table, Victor appeared diminished, isolated. Lena's absence was conspicuous, as was that of his other previous supporters. He had systematically dismantled his own support network. The trial was a grueling 3-day ordeal, 3 days of testimony and aggressive cross-examinations exposed every dysfunctional truth. Jessica functioned like a clinical surgeon. her methodical dissection of the case leaving Victor's counsel visibly demoralized. Arya gave her testimony on the second day. Her responses were precise, devoid of emotion or outbursts, offering no material for distortion. When the opposing attorney attempted to characterize her as a manipulator, asking, "Did you not conceal your work to claim credit later?" she maintained eye contact and stated, "No. I concealed my work on my husband's instruction. He stated it was advantageous for the company. I was operating under a condition of trust." From there, her case was constructed methodically. 3 prior employees gave corroborating accounts. He had appropriated their concepts, claimed their achievements, and terminated the careers of those who protested. Financial examiners traced the capital through a network of shell corporations. Marco testified to his long-standing interest in Arya, citing industry consensus that she was the true innovator. Victor's defense lacked substance. He spoke of communal property, of providing her a luxurious lifestyle, of a partnership. But the evidence presented against him was overwhelming. There were the electronic mails, the contractual agreements, and the recordings of meetings in which her voice dictated strategy while he merely affixed his signature. The court recessed on the 3rd day. 2 hours later, Victor's legal representative initiated settlement negotiations. The proposal was $150 million, complete ownership of her intellectual property, no non-disclosure agreement, and a public acknowledgement of her contributions. Jessica looked at Arya. "This is a substantial proposal. A judicial ruling might yield less." "What is your assessment?" "My assessment is that you have already prevailed. The truth is now public record. Every financial journalist in the nation has deconstructed this narrative." Accepting the deal simply accelerates the conclusion. Arya evaluated her options. A judge's deliberate, methodical decision versus an expedited path to autonomy. "Counteroffer," she stated, $200 million and a public apology from him. He also divests from every board, all titles, and every corporate entity he is involved with, erased from the corporate landscape. A wide smile appeared on Jessica's face. "I will place the call." They agreed upon $180 million, a formal written apology, and Victor's total expulsion from Hale Enterprises. The judge ratified the settlement by the end of the day. Outside, before a barrage of cameras, Arya approached the podium. "I am relieved this process has concluded." She read from the text Jessica had drafted. "But more so, I am grateful for the opportunity to present my narrative. For 5 years, I dedicated my psyche to a concept only to observe another individual affix their name to it. That period has ended. The facts are now known. Now, I am creating entities that will bear my name and my name alone." From the assembled crowd, a journalist called out, "What of Victor Hale? Is forgiveness possible?" Arya paused, contemplating the definition of forgiveness, an act of magnanimity for him or for herself. "No, I do not forgive him," she said at last. "But I harbor no animosity. I am simply finished with him, finished with the portion of my existence he consumed, finished with his narrative defining my own." She looked straight into a camera lens. "I am constructing something superior, something novel, and it will be entirely mine." She stepped back from the microphones. At the periphery of the commotion, Dante was waiting. When she got to him, their fingers intertwined. "So, what is the sensation?" he asked softly. "Lightness." They departed the courthouse in unison. Behind them, the media frenzy continued with shouted questions and camera flashes. The narrative would dominate the news cycle for days. Yet Arya did not look back, not a single time. 6 months later, Stone Strategic had 12 employees, 8 clients, and a queue of corporations seeking to retain her services. The fashion venture launched an initial public offering. The accessibility application was acquired by a technology conglomerate for $200 million. Arya's direct share was a net $20 million. Her new office was located in the same high-rise as Dante's corporate headquarters. Distinct entities but interconnected, partners in commerce and in life. The commitment they had made materialized around March, and they formalized it in April. A small ceremony beside a lake, with only Marco and Jessica present as witnesses. No photographers, no large celebration. Only the individuals who were significant. She retained her name, her autonomy, her drive to create. Victor vanished from public view. Reports suggested he was in Boston, a consultant for a small company, receiving directives from others. The descent from chief executive officer to subordinate must have been a difficult psychological adjustment. Arya examined her psyche for any residual pity for him. She located nothing. Not all psychological wounds resolve, but one can construct a new life of such magnitude that it obscures the scars. One temperate summer evening, she stood in her conference room, observing a wall displaying client portraits. Each represented a successful outcome. Each represented a life she had influenced, a vision she had helped materialize. Dante approached from behind, encircling her waist with his arms. "A nominal fee for your cognitions," he inquired, just contemplating the extent of the changes. Positive changes. The most optimal. She turned within his embrace. "This time last year, I was a non-entity. Now." A smile formed on her lips. "I feel indomitable." He emitted a low laugh. "I was going to suggest acknowledged, but indomitable is also accurate. You have merited it." He kissed her forehead. "Let's go." Marco is present. He wishes to open a bottle of champagne to commemorate the Castellane transaction. "But we did not secure Castellane." "No, but 3 of our clients are now acquiring its assets since its dissolution. Marco terms it poetic justice." Of course, Marco perceives poetry in market fluctuations. He is not incorrect, and in this case, he is accurate. They exited together. In the primary office, Marco was already uncorking the bottle, despite it being only 6 p.m. "A toast to Arya Stone," he declared as they approached, "for demonstrating to the world that true victory is not merely winning, but creating something so significant that the individual who harmed you becomes an irrelevant detail." They touched their glasses. To victory, to new beginnings, to a future they were authoring themselves. And later, in the quiet of the residence she shared with Dante, Arya observed the city lights activate below. Somewhere in that expanse, Victor was likely immersed in his own resentment, convincing himself she had taken from him, never comprehending she had merely reclaimed what was hers from the start. Let him possess his interpretation of the events. Let him revise history to position himself as the aggrieved party. She possessed the factual reality. She had endured it, and she had built an empire upon it. Her phone illuminated. It was a text message from a client, a young woman developing a company to assist impoverished communities. She had just secured her first major round of funding. "I genuinely could not have accomplished this without you. You altered my life's trajectory." A small smile touched Arya's lips. She typed a reply. No, you altered your own trajectory. I merely assisted you in locating the resources. It was a difficult lesson she had assimilated regarding power. Genuine power is not about domination or claiming credit or suppressing others for self-elevation. It resides in the act of creation. It is about utilizing one's own luminescence to help ignite another's. It is being acknowledged not through a demand for attention, but because your work motivates others to emerge from obscurity. Victor never grasped that principle. His concept of power was based on the ownership of people. He was mistaken. For 5 years, Arya was a ghost, constructing another person's ambition. Now she stood in the light, facilitating the construction of others' ambitions. That single transformation, from unobserved to observed, from exploited to esteemed, from ghost to powerhouse, validated every scar. 5 years of her existence were given over to a man's ego, but from that ordeal, she emerged reformed and potent. The tentative woman from only 6 months prior was now a stranger. That ghost was fragmented, betrayed, and controlled by anxiety. This new iteration was a different entity entirely. This was Arya, unconstrained, and she had come to understand that autonomy is the most profound form of retribution. Dante's arms enclosed her, his voice subdued. What is the subject of your thoughts? That's how my most significant trauma became my most significant triumph, she responds. How so? Victor had to demolish my world so that I could discover the one I was meant to construct. The subject ceases resistance, accepting his proximity. Without his rejection, my identity would have remained subsumed by his, a prop for a fraudulent dynasty. He inquires, Do you feel any remorse? She processes the conflict, the fatigue, the litigation, the collapse of Victor's enterprise. No, she concludes. I resent the necessity of the conflict, but not its outcome. Reclaiming my autonomy was not regrettable, nor is this. He affirms her. Correct. Your aptitude is undeniable. She reframes their bond. Our aptitude, a partnership. Partners, he confirms, initiating physical contact. The metropolis below is a matrix of countless trajectories and griefs. She projects her experience outward, postulating another subject whose paradigm is shattered by deceit. Another rendered insignificant by an object of affection. Arya hopes such trauma can be transmuted into agency, hopes they assert their own autonomy, and resist psychological annihilation. This is the core thesis. The objective is not retribution. It is the forceful reclamation of one's personal history, seizing what is inherently yours to construct a reality impervious to external assault. Victor's strategy of psychological degradation contained a fatal miscalculation. It served only to reinforce her psyche, rendering it unbreakable. This insight, Arya understood, was the sole significant outcome. It was not the judicial victory she secured, nor the absolute downfall she observed. The critical event was her emergence as the singular architect of her narrative, a self-sufficient individual with no outstanding emotional debts. All preceding data was now irrelevant noise from a discarded timeline,